We have the poll report there for approval. Councillor Jeff Henry, thank you. I almost called you Councillor Jeff. Councillor Henry, Councillor Freeman, all those in favor? That's probably all of us. Yes, that's right. All of us, thank you. Consent motion, there's 2 items on there. Anybody want anything pulled from consent or have questions on the 2 items? Seeing none, moved by Councillor Whaley, seconded by Councillor Feith. All those in favor? Thank you, it's all of us. Moving along nicely to staff reports. Item A, 2018 grant update report. There for information. Any questions? Any questions on this item? If none, I'll look for a mover. Moved by Councillor Henry, seconded by Councillor Freeman. All those in favor? Thank you all. Thanks, Brad. Good work on the grants and team. B, cash in lieu of parking agreement, 176 Regina Street North, 2501428 Ontario Inc. A report prepared by Rita Silak on the, what do you call that? The cash in lieu of parking. Any questions of Rita? To get this project on the go, to adapt to the changing face of rentals. Item C. It's the 2018-2019 electric scooter pilot project. Report prepared by Ryan Moutsey over a long period of time. Thank you, Ryan, for all your work on this. And we have a presentation from yourself and a number of others. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Mayor Jaworski, council members, ladies and gentlemen. Bring to you a very interesting project in the City of Waterloo. The UW Research and Technology Park and Phil Hewitson that were part of this project team. So very quickly, we are entering a new area of city building, and with technology is disrupting our cities and the way that we live and work. And so in looking at the intensification that we have, the investment in trails, we're setting ourselves up for the future. As part of this future vision, there's an evolving micro-mobility sector. And so this is just starting to emerge in day-to-day conversation. It's relatively new. And so we're going to learn a little bit more about micro-mobility in this pilot discussion and recommendation. Essentially, micromobility involves a shared transportation service. This is where you can have different types of vehicles that can be left off in docking stations or not docking stations and moved up and using apps to move through your city. And the rise of e-scooters, this is taking communities by storm. And so when you see the rise of e-scooters entering the communities, it's about being ahead of the curve. And so in looking at the last mile trip, the gap, that is a fundamental basis of micromobility and understanding how do you move across your city and communities. And this community provides an excellent test pilot. Very quickly, what is an e-scooter? Just to get any images out of your head, it's a 2 wheels, electric power, step-through frame, upright position kickstand. Very simple words that basically say it's basically one of those scooters you push around with the stick on the skateboard, except it's battery powered. And so this is a new term, and I'll just simply say that in terms of legislation, we must be aware and cognizant that all vehicles in terms of a motor vehicle, because it's battery powered, is subject to the Criminal Code of Canada. So things like impaired driving and all those rules are really important to understand, so you must approach this with caution. And so in Ontario, on the transportation side, in terms of how you define vehicle, there's definitions for what a vehicle is. And secondly, in terms of updating the Act, the Highway Transportation Act was updated to define power-assisted bicycles, but not e-scooters. And so there is a gap in the legislation that says, what is this vehicle? So Waterloo would be potentially, with this pilot, one of the first communities to endorse an e-scooter on specific routes, and that's very important to distinguish. Driving infractions are administered through the police, so we have been in discussions with the Waterloo Region's police services, the Region Waterloo and other team members. The MTO, Ministry of Transportation, is reviewing this new technology mobility, so this provides an opportunity to report back to the province. These are permitted on private property and along trails, so there's some exemptions in here in terms of, depending on your bylaws, how you could evaluate e-scooters. So very quickly, the City of Waterloo was approached by Neutron Holdings Inc., Lime. They are here today to do a brief presentation on themselves and their technology and their approach. Lime is very focused on entering the Canadian market. Today, they're in over 40 cities in the United States, and Canada is on their radar screen. And Waterloo was facilitated being one of the first communities in Ontario and possibly Canada. In terms of a dedicated route, this is what makes this pilot unique. It's 5.5 kilometers. It involves the UW-R&T Park. Mike will talk in just a second about the park itself and what that means. Phil can certainly talk about the active transportation and transportation merits of what this trail system presents along Laurel Trail. And this is all about a pilot, and a two-phase pilot that's being proposed to you. There's a fall 2018, very quick pilot to understand what this is about and innovative technologies and practices, and to be extended in spring of 2019, all subject to an agreement. There's a data sharing component with the city and to approve third parties that can understand the flow of traffic, and we'll definitely work with different groups to understand about what this pilot means, not only in Waterloo, but beyond. The purpose is to monitor, adjust, and report back. This is really what pilots do, and this is a unique location. So the pilot involves different stakeholders I touched upon, including private owners. In talking to the UW-R&T Park, there's individual property owners that are part of this pilot and just surrounding the IDEA corridor. In terms of the hardware and the pilot recommendations, it's going to have lights, bells, all the safety features. The Waterloo Region Police actually asked for bells, and those were put on as part of this pilot. In terms of user terms, there's updated information in terms of the user responsibilities. Being specifically on multi-use trails, private streets, and private property, this is what makes this pilot unique. Collaboratively, through a shared approach and vision, this is about making a pilot that works within those parameters on a defined pilot. There's signage plans, and you see some examples here in terms of what could be posted along the routes to inform users about being on the pilot route or not entering areas they should not. And the agreement talks about hours of operation, insurance, identification, all those elements that apply to the City of Waterloo. So in terms of having a separate process of the property owners, that's just being finalized right now. So as part of the team, this is a packaged proposal. And I just note in terms of how it works, it's only within the study area. You'll see maps in the report and on the slide presentation is that it's only within a defined scope of Laurel Trail, certain parts of the R&T Park, and the IDEA Corridor. So this pilot will allow potential expansions. That's subject to the CAO in terms of the agreements that we've drafted up. And so we can evolve this pilot study over the course of the term to kind of see what are the strengths, weaknesses, and lessons learned through this process. Geofencing, there'll be lots of discussion on that, I'm sure. But essentially, the city is geofenced, so it only allows you to let you know in terms of education and information with some techniques to say, stay on the route. This is a really important feature with the Waterloo pilot. Drivers must be 18, wear a helmet, there's maximum speed caps. All these elements will go into more detail by Lime themselves. Designated parking areas, they're called havens or hub spots. And rather than just leave them everywhere, there's areas that are designated along this route to help understand what this transportation is. It only operates between 7 a.m. and 9 p.m. and so there are no scooters on any property after that time, subject to picking them up and removing them, and that's the way it's prepared in terms of ensuring that there's no clutter during the evenings. Private storage with repair. Lime will talk a little bit more about how they're managing this. There's a little signage in there, and again, we see has many trailhead signs. This is an example of Laurel Trail up through the R&T Park. We can easily add signage on existing signposts to identify that there's a pilot route pending council's decision. In terms of register and then log on, there's clear steps. I'll leave this up to Lime to talk about the registration process, but it's an app-based mobile. You go through the steps, it educates you about how to use it, and then you're off using the electric scooter. In terms of the route, I'm going to bring Mike up for a second here to talk about the R&T Park. I just noted and reinforce that it's only on multi-use trails and private streets. That's a really important distinction for this pilot. Mike, can you take 2 minutes to talk about UW-R&T Park, please?
Yeah. Thanks very much, Ryan, and thanks for the opportunity to talk about this. I'm really excited about this project for the research park. I think it serves a number of really interesting opportunities. So many of you know the R&T Park, but just in case you don't, we're 120 acres. We've just completed our 10th building. We're about 4,000 people. So we're one of the largest research parks in Canada from a square footage standpoint. And interestingly enough, we're also one of the youngest. So there's a really tremendous opportunity for us to find ways to build better connections across the research park, especially with the LRT station coming. This last mile problem and our east-west connections are really becoming more and more important if we want to continue to invest in active transportation and our mass transportation system. So getting people from the LRT station on one side of the park to OpenText, which is 500 meters away, it's not that far, but it's far enough that if you could drive and just park right in front of your building, you're motivated. So for us to make that easier and for people to get out for lunch, one of our challenges in the park is right now we don't have a restaurant. I'm working on it. But right now, to get down to University Plaza or across to Matter of Taste, it's inconvenient. And if we want people to walk or ride their bikes or anything, we need options for them to get there. So I think Lime presents a really interesting opportunity for this. Another reason that I like this pilot project is it's also a bit of a pilot project for the research park, because we want to start getting more focused on using what the park has to be a bit of a living lab, to test projects like this, to find research, to bring to bear best practices, and then make recommendations of how to do this right, not just across Waterloo, but across the province, across the country. So for us to have a first of its kind pilot in Canada gives us a great opportunity for us to do some research and figure out how to make recommendations to do this well. I'd love for us to be able to embrace more of these kinds of projects where we're leveraging the resources of the research park, leveraging the research capabilities of the university, and starting to be able to try out new things that maybe we don't exactly know how to deploy them across an entire city. And UW Research has expressed interest in doing some research projects in partnership with Lime and the city on this one. The last reason I'm super excited about this is a great example of collaboration. The research park was born out of a collaboration between the university, the city, and the region in partnership with funding from the province and the federal government. So this is another great example of us coming together to figure out how to work together to do things that are really innovative and interesting and are going to help people get around better.
Thank you, Mike. I have with me Phil, who's been instrumental, along with many other people, a part of this pilot project. And maybe, Phil, if I can ask you to say a couple words about the conclusions, I'll wrap it up with the recommendation points in here, if you're fine with that.
Good afternoon, Council. Anyway, we're excited about this project just because we think it'll get people out of their cars. So anything we can see less cars on the road, I think it's good for the city, it's good for the pedestrians and the cyclists that are already out there. So the route that was picked was on purpose to try to keep it on the trail or on a private road at the university or on a multi-use trail on a city street. So I think it's going to meet the objectives of our transportation master plan, which is really to provide a balanced transportation network. So we're excited about that and look forward to answering any questions.
And then just a closing part about what makes this project and pilot unique. Aside from the route and the collaboration with the R&T Park and the potential UW study grant component, this is about e-scooters. This is different than motorized bikes or shared bikes, and so we took this on with the City of Waterloo to deal with this within this very specific area of interest as a pilot. In terms of the city's strategic plan, this is focused on economic development and transportation, multimodal transportation. So we think this is a core pillar in terms of meeting those objectives. And finally, in terms of refinement and adjustments, this is a living lab. Council approval is being asked for to start this process. And simply, as part of this living lab process, the boundaries and the routes may evolve a little bit. Signage will evolve. We just ask that everyone just know that this is a pilot route and it's defined. So whatever is the approved pilot route, it's what's in place. And then people will be updated as it gets tweaked over the next little bit if council chooses to move forward. In terms of consultation, there will be further consultation. There's a whole series of committee groups, organizations, project teams, panels that will invest in reporting back in the final report in August 12th, 2019. That's the date to come back to council with the full recommendations. And so the recommendations before you as a project team, I just note to approve the report. Secondly is that the CAO be authorized to execute all and any documents necessary to implement the electric scooter pilot project to the satisfaction of the city solicitor. That staff provide an update to council on the electric scooter pilot during the summer of 2019 as noted. And council hereby delegates the CAO authority to act on behalf of the city in exercising the city's rights set out in the agreement, notwithstanding any renewal of the term and agreement shall require approval by council. So this is intended to run through the pilot as proposed, and if there's any future pilots to come through. And so happy to answer any questions, and just to note that this is going to be a work in progress.
Thank you very much, team. Questions? I see Councillor Whaley and Councillor Durrell's first out of the gate.
Well, thank you for working on this, guys. It's been so much fun to watch you have this idea come forward quickly, and you were quickly on it. And we have a chance here to be a Canadian first, which is so exciting. A couple of questions. Is there any exclusivity agreement in this?
I can start this answer in that this is a non-exclusive agreement. This is being done with Lime specifically and Neutron Holdings to commence this pilot. And so it's non-exclusive, which means that if someone else were to come to this process, we'd be happy to review the terms and agreements that would apply in a project like this and to move forward in the spring of next year. And so again, it's a living lab, and we can learn and work with people on this. And again, we can share more with that.
So Ryan, you've been involved in economic development here as one of our top guys for a long time. Tell me how you view this opportunity, what it means for economic development, what it means for jobs, not just today, but in the future.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski. As always, it's always a team effort, and this project would not be here without a full team and full staff and expertise to come here. So I just say that everyone's top working through, if I can politely say that. And then secondly, in terms of what it means for economic development, we just came off a great Lumen event, and in terms of looking at the successes of Waterloo preparing itself for the future, the Idea Quarter is another example of changing direction for the city and working through on reposition for development. This represents to be as part of the best in class as national leaders. And so in terms of economic development, it's an awareness component to learn and build off the work being done in the United States. This is coming, so rather be ahead of the curve than following. And I think in terms of numbers, the pilot will set itself up in collaboration with other pilot studies and experiences to really support the light rail transit system and improve specific districts. The city and the region have dedicated bike lanes that can be reviewed and tested over time. It really sets itself up with the building blocks to really move people around really well. So I think by being ahead of the curve and working with the right team people involved with this project, there can be lessons to learn not only here regionally, provincially and nationally. So Waterloo has the ability to be that living lab, and I think for economic development they'll see many benefits from that in itself.
Next up, Councillor Durrell.
Thank you, through Mayor Jaworski. Thank you for the report. I know that you worked really hard on getting this done. I want to acknowledge Councillor Whaley. I think you were the one to ride these. Is that right? Brought it to the city. So amazing that we have leaders around council and leaders within our organization that see great things and bring them back to us. So thank you for that, Councillor Whaley. I did a little traveling this summer, and one of the places I was in Paris, and e-scooters were everywhere. And so, of course, I'm thinking about tourism and the opportunity for tourism in Waterloo, something that we never really step right to the table to embrace. How can we get, I mean, we're really talking about the people who live here, people in the R&T park, but this is also an opportunity for people to explore along the path during the pilot project are cities. So are we working collaboratively with the tourism, Waterloo Regional Tourism, to make sure that this is something that we can promote? What does that look like?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski. Great question. As part of the pilot, there's so much to dig in on this project. I think part of it, we've been directly involved with the region in Waterloo so that they have an understanding of what this means regionally. So that's really important in terms of just an infrastructure component. These are not permitted on GRT buses or through upcoming ION trains. So we have to understand regionally what that means with our partners in the cities and surrounding areas. I think in terms of the various committees, we still have a lot of work to do in consultation to go through with the committees. We did go to the Uptown Vision Committee. We'll be going to the Waterloo Park Advisory Committee in very near future. So in terms of gaining input and consideration from other groups, we're going to do that. We've been in discussions with Waterloo Economic Development Corporation in terms of understanding what that is already, and they've actually visited Lime's office to get a better understanding of who they are and what they do. So there's a really good relationship there. So I think all the pieces are moving together. The tourism piece will probably be to follow the pilot, just because if we're promoting it regionally, and that's a regional piece, we'll want to have all the ducks lined up and potential to make sure that the legislation's in place for the regional experience. And lastly, in terms of our own uptown as an example of economic development, what is Waterloo Park to bring people in the park itself longer term in phase 2 of the pilot? How do you get people in the idea quarter further abroad? This pilot really sets up future trail connections, work with the businesses, and look for opportunities to leverage this new transportation choice. So simply put, I've taken a long time to say there is others that we can work with. Sustainable Waterloo Region, they've been participating through this process. There's so many groups that have shown and expressed interest in this. We're just the tip of the iceberg.
I have just one more question. So you're using this e-scooter, and your house is just 2 blocks off the path. We're using geofencing. Does the thing shut down? What happens here?
Well, I'll start with that component. Lime is here to talk specifically about this unique...
Just sneak home, just to grab an extra pair of heels for the night. How does that? What's going to happen to my e-scooter?
I think I'd just say, in knowing that we're one of the first, is that we really approached it from a team approach. And so the questions being asked before coming to you as council is, this has probably been one of the most rigorous experiences in terms of understanding how to manage e-scooters. It's the first in Ontario and possibly Canada. So I think the level of technology and reactive and proactive measures are being evaluated during the pilot. And you'll see some very innovative pieces about not only just traditional signage, but techniques used by Lime to let people know once they leave the geofence area. There's an education component before, and that will be worked on to educate users about where this route is. And then secondly, there'll be measures in place that that will evaluate and deter people from going outside that piece. If I could defer that question specifically for Lime about their solutions on that, I would like to extend that conversation to them following this part of the presentation.
Ask Lime. Got it.
Next up, Councillor Maven, please.
And thank you, and through you, Mayor Jaworski. Just so I'm clear, the answer to Councillor Durrell's question is that it does shut off? That was the answer? Yeah. Okay, because I didn't hear the answer as such. Okay. We haven't got bicycles quite perfect yet, all the bicycle paths and so on. And we're introducing this item. Interesting. Can we go back a little bit, if I may, to slide 6 or 7, where it lays out the path? Oops, right there is great. Okay, thank you. I notice it doesn't cover the University of Waterloo, just the tech park. Was there a reason for excluding the university?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski. We've been in discussions through, and I best turn it over to Mike, and that's one of the reasons why he's here, but the University of Waterloo is very aware of this project, and this is about understanding the pilot and origins and destinations between the Uptown, Laurel Trail, and the R&T Park. University of Waterloo itself is a whole nother area of potential But Mike, if that's okay, if I can just kind of transfer you over in terms of the University of Waterloo, because we are in active discussions with them. The pilot will determine if there's a plan in place coming back in August in terms of expanding the routes, and that will be part of the conversation. Mike?
Sure. Yeah, so I mean, I'll make clear I speak for the research park, not main campus, which is a whole another complex thing. But I can say main campus, our priority, while we certainly welcome cycling, skateboards, and all kinds of other modes of transportation, the main campus is traditionally designed around pedestrianism. So we look for people when they're navigating through campus to dismount from bicycles, to dismount from skateboards for the safety of everyone traveling through. Interestingly enough, our highest person-on-person incidents tend to be with cyclists and pedestrians more so than cars. And that's just, the way that it's designed is to really encourage pedestrianism. So at this point in time, what they wanted to do was see how this looked on the trail system and determine the best way forward. So that's really part of the research component, is we need to have a much deeper understanding of the interactions between people and scooters before we can say it's really the right solution for what's on campus. But it's certainly something that we're looking at and hoping that we can kind of figure out how to accommodate.
Okay, and I had experience, not Paris, but Washington, D.C. this summer, where they had e-scooters, and they had a path, a bicycle path, e-scooter path, if you will. And it was the behavior of the people on the e-scooters was a little bit different than the people on the bicycles. The bicycles went too slow for the e-scooters. So they'd just hop off the bicycle path and go around. And is that the type of behavior you're looking for in this study, pilot? What happens when people come in conflict with each other, whether it's pedestrians or cyclists?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski. Great question, Councillor Maven. This is all part of the pilot and understand the data and the dashboards, growing what conflicts will be notified if there are conflicts. These scooters come with speed caps, and so they're set at 24 kilometers an hour. And so the reason for that, it's about the average speed of a bicycle. And so the test is to understand what this is. Do they need to be increased or decreased? But that is our cap right now, is 24 kilometers per hour. And so those limitations and constraints are put in to test this. And this is part of the reason why the research grant for the University of Waterloo is one avenue to study this more. Certainly in terms of our understanding of how it moves in through the city of Waterloo, will be incorporated into the report findings in terms of user behavior, what worked well as strategies, what didn't work well. So what you should expect in August 12th of next year is a full detailed summary of the results and findings and the measures taken to address those with the results of those measures. So this is a true living lab.
Okay. If I may have a question of staff, a question for Keshwar, if I may. Has this been reviewed with our insurers as far as our city liability, if any?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Maven, yes, the contract has been reviewed with the insurance pool. Our legal services division has reviewed it with them. We've incorporated their feedback, so they have certainly been consulted.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks. And I just had one question for Mike on the matter of taste. Matter of taste in 451 Phillip, right? Is that where they're located?
Yes, in the Factory Square building.
Yeah, so Factory Square is technically outside of the R&T Park, so it's just the fact that there's the, but it's attached to R&T Park. Is that how that figures into it, having a haven for the e-scooters?
Yeah, so there is, the expectation people will dismount when they cross the LRT, but you can go from the research park to 451 Phillip Street through the LRT station. The expectation is obviously they will dismount, walk the scooter through the platform, and then the developers at 451 Phillip have agreed to create a station there for the bikes so that people can go grab a coffee, meet a friend.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I think I see no further questions of the presenters. So thank you very much. First up I have from delegations, two delegations. First up from Lyme, Nico Probst and Nate Curry.
Welcome. Thank you. Thank Thank you, Mayor, members of the City Council. My name is Nico Probst, and I serve as the manager of Midwest Strategic Development for Lime. I'm incredibly excited to be here, and thank you for the opportunity to represent the company and to share some remarks. I want to use the majority of my time to answer some specific questions. I know already a few have been raised, and we can definitely get into the specifics, but wanted to share a little bit about our company and why we came to be here and why we've looked at Waterloo as such a great market for us. So Lime has a simple but pretty transformative mission, and that's to make transportation more convenient, affordable, and accessible. We do this by providing the best rider experience with top quality products, superior customer service, and on-the-ground local presence and operations team that manages all of our products. Nate Curry is with me. He has been here on the ground in Waterloo for the past month, sort of identifying the exact operations mechanisms that we need to facilitate the best user experience possible. He's been working on hiring a robust team who will actually manage the fleet when they're on the ground, and that's a real big focus of our companies at large, is ensuring we have a really robust local presence, and we build that out from there, which is a really exciting offering of our company. We were founded in January 2017, based out of San Francisco, California. After receiving our first round of funding, we launched our first market as a traditional pedal bike share company in Greensboro, North Carolina in June 2017. Since then, we've offered our products in over 100 plus markets and counting, 40 of those which include the scooters, which Ryan was discussing. And we really are the fastest growing and largest American mobility shared service. And we're the only shared mobility company to date that's deployed a multimodal fleet that includes pedal bikes, e-bikes, and electric scooters, the product we're discussing today. Our products are all GPS and 3G enabled, which makes it easier for riders to find, unlock, and pick up a nearby bike or scooter with their smartphone. To use Lime, riders simply download the Lime app. They locate a bike or scooter on the map and then unlock it with a tap of the button and lock it when they finish. Before they get on the product, they'll get a tutorial of how they're supposed to operate the product, the proper areas of where they're supposed to operate. For this pilot specifically, the actual map of the pilot zone itself. We offer also anonymized data to cities to support your local infrastructure planning needs, and we support this trip data to help optimize our local operations. And what I mean by that is that when we start collecting the data, we're better to understand where the bikes and the scooters are coming from and ending up, which can help us make better decisions about where to deploy the bikes and help cities make better decisions about how to support that local infrastructure. Today, we're incredibly excited by the possibility of partnering with Waterloo to pilot these scooters in an identified trail route system. And getting this pilot up and running really has been a true public-private partnership, and we've been incredibly impressed by the innovative approach that your city has taken to serving residents' transportation needs. This council, from my understanding, has identified the need to diversify methods by which people can get around in your strategic plan, and through this pilot, we're working to accomplish that goal. Our scooters are a fun, effective carbon emission reduction mechanism that allows individuals to solve their last mile transportation concerns. And in other markets we operate, I think, incredible adoption rate that we've seen of these scooters has been incredibly high. And what we're finding is that users are connecting their rides to existing networks of transportations offered by cities. And that includes everything from the public transportation offerings that cities have already built and existing rideshare opportunities that they've implemented in their cities, including bike share networks as well. So long story short, this product really is revolutionizing how people get around their cities, and we're incredibly excited and thankful for the opportunity to pilot this mobility option right here in Waterloo. If the council adopts this measure, and I think this is a really important point, Waterloo will be the first Canadian city to launch this product, and we really will have the opportunity to set the course for how other cities implement these micromobility offerings to their residents and really set the stand for the province and the nation at large. So from there, I'll pause and take some questions. We can get into some of the earlier questions that were raised, but really want to thank the council and the leadership of the city for inviting us to be here and working with us and getting this pilot up and running.
Wonderful. Thank you. Questions for the delegation? Any fresh questions? Councillor Durrell?
Well, I guess I'll just redirect.
Yes.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, no, thank you.
And this is a really interesting technology. I'm really interested to see this pilot project through. My question is, what if someone just not me? I follow rules, but if someone just wants to sneak off the path, they don't. I mean, especially for uptowners. It's right in our area. So what happens?
Yeah. So first, I should say that this approach to the pilot is a very, very unique market for us, one that we've never taken before, but we're incredibly excited by the opportunities to learn from it. And one of the components that we've been talking to the city about is through our geofence capabilities. We've built out geofencing in other cities. That's not something that's new. And typically what that would look like in other markets is that they would sort of identify areas that they want geofenced off from the scooters going into. Originally, as we started that, it really was sort of pop-up notifications that would happen on the phone after the ride to say that they were in areas that they shouldn't be. But as we've created this technology, we're now adding new layers of technology to that. And one of the things that we're slowly going to implement, but we really want to sort of see how users best adopt and change behavior, is through slowdown mechanisms. So we can actually slow the speed down on the scooters to make it a sort of bad user experience, if you will, so that it would deter them from taking it. Walking is faster. It's more inconvenient to be slowed down to a 5 mile per hour crawl. We can also do locking capabilities. So you can, if you take it to that home of yours, you actually can't lock the product. So you're still being charged for it's still up and running because you're not in the dedicated pilot zone. But I think to what Ryan and his team have really identified as a true living lab, we're going to be able to start seeing what user behaviors are pushed by that technology. We've really focused our technology in sort of the gamification of what our app can do to deter and incentivize user behavior. So I think that's what's really going to be interesting about this approach that we're taking with the city. The learnings that you guys are going to have are going to be just as fascinating to us as a company. It's something that we're working with cities all across the world on. Everyone has areas of the city that they don't want the products in or areas that they want to get them to. And I think through these learnings, we're going to be able to identify some of the key ways that we can do all of that. And that's one of, I think, the really exciting things about this pilot is the innovative approach that we're going to have and sort of the data sharing components and the focus of the city as serving as a living lab to supplement other cities' transportation offerings is something that is incredibly exciting. And typically in the conversations that we have with cities, they're really focused on what this product can do for their city. They're not focusing on what can they set standardized for other markets. And I think that's a very unique approach that is unique to Waterloo.
Next up, Councillor Whaley, then Councillor Maven.
Nico, increasingly sometimes I feel like a creaky old man, but I have to tell you, every time I'm on that scooter, I feel like I'm 9 years old. It's so much fun.
You look 21 every time you're on it, because 18 plus is the age that you're supposed to operate them. So I hope 9
I'll bring my ID with me. So let me tell you, the transportation itself is amazing, but there's also something that's kind of overlooked, and that's the data. Mm-hmm. And you're in a town which is Canada's technology capital here. What does the data mean to us, and how can we take that data that you're going to supply us and turn it into something magical?
Yeah, and I think this was when I first came here and was invited by the city to give a presentation. The first presentation I did to sort of discuss the data offerings, I saw 1 million light bulbs go off on people's heads, and I think that really tells you something special about this city. Everyone's looking at the opportunity that data can give to you as a city to make transportation-informed decisions. And frankly, I think that is something that we as a company have just scratched the surface on. When we started, we really had a full commitment, a full transparency of data sharing, obviously anonymized to protect individual users' data rights. But what we wanted was to give cities a snapshot of where people were going to and from, where sort of the hub spots of the traffic of their city were occurring. But there are things down the road that we have talked about and we haven't even implemented, and things that we would like to learn from the cities as to what they would want. Many cities just say, we really want to see the end in trip data usage. Many cities can utilize it as a mechanism to figure out where transportation offerings are limited, existent, and are these supplementing some of those limited transportation offerings. But there are, I think, a unique, incredible other ways that we can use the scooters. It is a product that is on roads and on trails here, but it potentially has the opportunity to tell a city how many carbon emissions are being added on a specific street. It could potentially have a sensor on it that tells you where the potholes on the road are at, and that can help a city not have to do that survey data themselves or take the constant 311 requests that you're getting about pothole usage. So we've really just scratched the surface of it, but I think what's so incredible about the unique environment that you guys have fostered in this community is we want to know what else we could be doing with the data. You're going to get this exact same snapshot that we as a company have. You'll see where the sort of hot spots of the trips are going. Here, I think it's going to be pretty obvious considering we have sort of a very specified trail route, but you're going to really see the unique end and beginning destination points, which can tell you, wow, we really need some more product offerings here. or if you're considering, broader public transportation offerings, this might be a spot that you're identifying as a place to build that infrastructure at. This is an important spot to build bike lane infrastructure to help support more micromobility efforts. And those are no longer decisions that you have to make as a guess. This is actual real informed decision making that you'll be able to have.
Next up is Councillor Maven, please.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Jaworski. Just to confirm then, so the geofencing is finite, and they don't work off that. That's good to know. It's quite impressive.
I will say we are. The beauty of this is that we're going to identify which ways work best, right? We have sort of a multiple amount of options that we can utilize the geofence, whether it's a fine-based system or a slowdown system. And I think we're going to sort of toy around with a little bit and see what works best. Ultimately, there are a couple things we want, right? The best user experience possible to get them from the beginning and end destination. That's what makes this a habitual transportation option. We don't want this to be a novelty item. We don't want someone to get on this once and feel like, wow, this was a lot of fun. We want this to be something that really gets someone to and from. So we want to ensure that we're creating the best user experience while also keeping the parameters of the pilot area intact. So that's going to be a really unique aspect of this because this is a new technology that we're beginning to implement in markets. This is going to be a really good test case of what right gamification works for right area. And it might be in different zones of the city, right? Maybe we have parking concerns and people keep taking them into an area they shouldn't be, and maybe that means that we really need to focus on the fine-based system. Maybe there's an area where people are a little bit confused by it being part of the pilot area, and maybe that's an area that makes sense as a slowdown zone. So we're really going to see as the process goes along, and I think the really good partnership that we've formed with the city will be helping us to identify those right spots. But to your question, yes, we have a multitude of ways that we can do it, and the geofence is the ultimate way that we do it all.
Okay, and then just a follow-up question, if I may. But as far as the registration discipline, I understand the online registration, and you go up and I guess it's like car share, there'll be an e-scooter someplace. How do you make sure that there's driver's license? How do you make sure there's a helmet?
Yep. So driver's license verification is one of the first things that you do in the app. So you scan your driver's license and then it'll confirm, and that's totally for age identification requirements, not for, frankly, we don't necessarily care if you're an operable driver because these aren't a car. These are much to be like a bike, right? You don't need a driver's license to operate a bike. But the thought is that is the best way to do age verification. And so that's one of the things that we'll be having in the fold as part of the introductory option of the app. In terms of helmet requirements, we as a company can't require folks to use helmets, but when you open the app, we highly, 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 highly encourage helmet usage. And I think this is sort of an issue with the sort of shared economy at large. How do you do helmet sharing is a sort of tough issue that no one's sort of figured out because of the sanitary concerns. But one of the things that we do, and we'll definitely focus on our efforts as we get up and running here, is actually passing out helmets and getting that sort of a user-informed behavior. I think one of the great things about the route that we've got identified is that it really isn't competing with cars per se. It's competing with bikes and pedestrian traffic. And in many countries in Europe who have really adopted bike share and have complete systems dedicated to bike share only. You notice in a lot of those countries that helmet usage isn't high. That's not something that we're encouraging, but the reason that's the case is because they're not competing with the cars, they're competing with other bicyclists, and so the accidents that they have are much more damaging than if you were to interact with a car. All that is to say is that we really want to encourage helmet behavior, but we can't enforce it. And there is no helmet requirement, I think, within municipal law or provincial law, but we really, really want to encourage helmet usage, and we do that through in-app education, whether it be when you first download the app and get on it and take the ride, and through sort of the promotional marketing materials that we send as follow-ups after your ride. Your email is registered to us, and we continue to do in-app education and continued education on what good riding behavior looks like.
Okay, so if we pass something, the pilot project that requires helmets, it really isn't enforceable. That's what I'm hearing.
You would, not on our end, right? We can't. I can't sit there and monitor every person who uses helmets. That's something that you would have to discuss with your police force if that's something that you want to enforce. But one thing I would say about just helmet enforcement at large, it can be actually an equitable prohibitive mechanism, and it's, I think, something that people don't think about in the front end. And what I mean by that is that, one of the beauties of this product is that we can place it in areas where public transportation hasn't been yet offered. And the reason we can do that is because we're less worried about sort of the market economics of will it be utilized or not. We have programs in place that allow sort of discounted rides for low-income users, and the hope is that they start using it. But many of those individual folks have haven't, adapted to a bike system yet or a scooter system, so they don't necessarily have helmets. And so we don't want this to be a prohibitive item. We want this to be an encouraged item for them. And the hope is that as they use this as a consistent transportation item, that behavior of helmet usage becomes a normative thing and not something that we have to require.
Okay. And final question then. I understand how the consumer user feedback can happen. I mean, there's many opportunities with your app and so on. But what about the interactive feedback with the people who might be in conflict with the e-scooter, the cyclists, the pedestrians, the automobiles even? How do you get feedback? How do you solicit it? How would people be able to provide that information to us and to you?
Yeah, so a couple things. One, we really feel like we are not competing with pedestrians or bike traffic. We actually feel like we're supplementing that activity. Our overall goal is much of a shared mission that the bike industry has large, which is getting people out of cars and into something that is healthier, safer, a cleaner form of transportation. And that's why we look at the scooters as a micromobility product. And the reason that Ryan alluded to why we cap them at 24 kilometers is to mimic the sort of top cycling speed that you see on an average trail. So that's one sort of component about the shared space that they have. In terms of just general complaints and how do people solicit feedback to us about whether it be usage or parking concerns. So we have a 1-800 number on all of the products. It also has an info ad account on it. So folks can immediately alert us as soon as our team on the ground, Nate and the team, gets that notification. They have to go respond to that, and we have about a 2-hour response rate from when the notification hits. The city obviously is also going to have a direct line to us, and they will work simultaneously with our operations team, and already have, in trying to figure out how we get this pilot up and running. And the beauty of that is that if you guys are getting calls into your office, direct them our way. We should handle that. We have the team on the ground. It should be our resources spent on dealing with those complaints and those feedback elements there. So those are sort of the ways that we address those concerns.
Thank you.
And seeing no further questions for the delegation, thank you very much. Next up is Emmett Meacher, Director of Business and Government Affairs, Drop Mobility. Welcome, Emmett.
Hello. This is fine. Okay. Hello, Council. Thank you very much. I always enjoy the opportunity when I get to speak directly to policy and lawmakers. I think it's something a lot of citizens don't always have the opportunity to do. I think it's fantastic and speak directly with those that are working to better their communities. As it was said, my name is Emmett Meacher. I'm here on behalf of Drop Bike. We have had the pleasure of working with your city staff on a smart mobility program for over the past year. We've worked through an RFI process, agreements, contracts, and now finally a potential implementation of the program in spring 2019. We started Drop Bike with the intention to provide new mobility services to Canadians by Canadians across the country. We're Toronto-based companies with founders who are civically minded in their approach to business and technology. We were the first company in North America to properly partner with the city and launch a smart bike share system that was in Kingston, Ontario. We learned extremely quickly, much quicker than others, that simply dumping bikes or scooters and inducing demand isn't the way to create a proper mobility system or study user behavior. To date, we have partners with over 10 municipalities in Canada to provide these services, but our agreements are much different than other companies in our space, based off our beliefs of what we think will work in the long term. We believe a partnership approach of working with cities and not making cities a referee between two different companies with different assumptions about how the mobility space works. We believe in integrating these transit systems into existing regional mobility and transit infrastructure and customizing our operator model to suit residents and visitors. If this pilot goes through, we believe the organization of our system will be compromised across the region. Users will be confused about how they use the mobility system. When you say to a user that they are allowed to leave a bike or a device anywhere, they absolutely take you up on that challenge. We have worked to be a leader in this community and innovators in the smart mobility space. We were the first company to institute smart parking spaces when we coined the terms havens almost a year ago. We provide our whole fleet with Lock 2 capabilities, which means that users will be nudged to leave their devices where they would leave a normal device. And these might seem like small things, but they actually create enormous differences in the user experience. A shared mobility system doesn't just have to be convenient, it has to be organized and reliable. And that's why we've worked very closely with staff to build a robust hub-based model across the entire region and take the time to collaborate with staff on the location of these hubs, something that your staff has been working on for over a year. As you can see in the staff report in front of you, this pilot may jeopardize our region-wise pilot, and not just in Waterloo, but Cambridge and Kitchener as well. Our intention, again, is to create a reliable, convenient, affordable, and organized system. We believe, along with your transportation staff, that this needs to be a regional effort. Grand River Transit provides mobility service to the entire Waterloo region, which makes sense. It's silly to ask users to hop on different types of buses with different cards and different fares and different rules. Users need reliability, they need convenience, and they need continuity if you want to get them out of their own personal cars and onto public infrastructure. This is why your staff has worked so hard to produce a regional mobility pilot, and that's why we believe that this pilot will affect our pilot in the entire region. Different user experiences will bleed into each other's operations. A company that is only interested in utilization rates, not compliance, will cause chaos in our system because these users will treat our system the way they treat theirs. DropBike has never entered a market with another smart mobility vendor for very good reasons. We've also never ever been kicked out of a city, unlike some competitors who have been kicked out of multiple, such as 2 last week. And in fact, we've never ever taken our bikes or anything back up once we've gone down. The implementations of our programs are extremely important, and we're there for the long haul. And just to be clear, in case it wasn't clear, the e-scooter pilot is supposed to be geofenced, but these devices do not lock up. They're not like shopping carts. What would happen is if you go outside the geofence area, you receive a notification, and that's only if you have notifications turned on. So when you take it into downtown Waterloo or you take it into downtown Kitchener, you may receive a notification if you don't just walk away. At that point, that user has to decide if they're going to bring that scooter all the way back to where they found it, or if they're actually going to go where they had planned on going. That's a very hard decision to make to be compliant. From that moment on, once that scooter starts to get shared in the city centers, it's not both illegal, but it also starts compromising our system. From our discussions with your teams and the teams at the City of Cambridge, the City of Kitchener, and the region of Waterloo, we have had to go through a very vigorous process, including an RFI, months of contract negotiation, and now finally getting into the implementation of the program. This is what we assumed and believed the entire process was, and what it would take to also evolve into e-scooters. We have worked very hard to learn about the community here. We have worked with the University of Waterloo, Wilfrid Laurier. We've worked with the Working Center, who have been extreme supporters of DropBike and have been great ambassadors to our region. Operations is what makes or breaks this business, and that's where most of our concerns are stemming from. As I'm sure you know, in Ontario, under the Ontario Highway Traffic Act, e-scooters do not comply with requirements for motor vehicles and are not captured by the definitions for electric bikes or power-assisted bicycles. And therefore, e-scooters in Ontario, as well as BC and Alberta, are only permitted on private property that does not have public vehicle access, and, if allowed by municipal bylaws, on sidewalks and pathways. The purpose of all new mobility pilots is to study the first and last mile transit. Data sharing is commonplace in the market between any vendor. Something I think that will be very difficult to derive from a small 5.5 kilometer stretch versus a region-wide mobility program that works with the whole city and others to allow people to move throughout the cities with the program to really understand how people want to use these new mobility devices. If this pilot moves forward, there is no doubt in our mind that these scooters will end up in the city of Waterloo as well as others. Why? Because exactly what everyone has said, they are incredibly fun to be on, but they're also quite dangerous. A quick Google search can show you hundreds, if not thousands, of videos of image of these things breaking, cut lines, rusted out, falling mid-trip, brakes not working, etc., etc. We ourselves have been hesitant to get into the e-scooter market. We're currently building our own prototypes. We are not simply adopting the personal use devices for commercial use over here from China. We believe that our pilot ticks all of the same boxes as this other proposed pilot. Every piece of technology that you've heard is commonplace by almost every vendor in the marketplace by now. Geofencing, data sharing, everything. On-the-ground operations. The e-scooter will start on the stretch of land, but there will be immediate pressure to expand, creating competition in the space that we are examining. Our incentives as DropBike is going to change from trying to help the city with first and last mile, placing devices in certain areas, to having to beat out competition, to beat out our San Francisco competition, if I might say. This creates two competing factions within your own bureaucracy, which is with two different agendas. We're very optimistic, though, that if the city of Waterloo, as well as the region of Waterloo and the city of Cambridge and the city of Kitchener, would like to explore an e-scooter pilot in the summer and spring of 2019 and continuing, that we can provide these services, including along this trail. And we are asking today for council to reconsider the small fall pilot in an effort to protect a much larger initiative that spans 3 municipalities and has taken over a year to work through properly. Thank you for your time, and I will take any questions.
Questions for the delegate? And if there aren't any as yet, I do. It was very interesting at the end of your conversation there where you mentioned, it sounded like first 80% was, e-scooters bad and things like that. And at the end you said, but if you wait, we'll have e-scooters too. Can you explain that? Is that how I understood it?
Absolutely. It's an interesting industry. We're brand new. But the transportation and mobility space is very old. We've been trying to get people around properly. There are companies that want to do this fast, sell to investors, they need to move. And there are other companies that believe this technology is here to stay for a long time, and that over time we can properly integrate these things. It's not that we don't believe in e-scooters. If you look at the utilization rates of e-scooters, they're absolutely incredible, along with e-bikes and normal push bikes, but e-scooters seem to have the most. But they're not done right yet. They're usually not waterproofed. Lots of cables are still sticking out. Like I said, a Google search can go a far way with this stuff. There are videos of people taking these things off steps. No one is going to dismount a scooter to go over train tracks. And we need to work through these things. It's very important to us to make sure that our users understand that we're interested in doing this in the long haul. We want people to treat these things like they treat public buses. And right now the technology of the devices is not there. No lock 2 capabilities. Like I said, it's not waterproof. You can't stop these things or slow them down just yet, etc. So we're working on building our own, and we're confident that we'll get something good. Yeah.
And then does Drop Bike, you mentioned you operate how many municipalities?
10 municipalities
10
across Canada, and,
okay, so
and
10
numerous agreements with universities.
Okay, and 10 municipalities. In any of those municipalities, do you have other last mile solutions in there?
Other than bikes and e-bikes?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
So just bikes and e-bikes. We do have some transit integration in some of our municipalities.
Okay. And are those, just out of interest, if you're able to tell, are those like exclusive agreements? Would it prohibit e-scooters in there? Or if e-scooters came into those 10 municipalities, would Drop Bike exit it? And I know you're causing you to speculate. I'm just trying to get the background here on
absolutely.
The current situation.
Absolutely. Most of our agreements are exclusive in nature, and that's because we pilot with the intent of doing it with us in the city and making sure our data isn't tainted through competition. As you can imagine, when two people are competing, it becomes a lot less about first and last mile and a lot more of who has more users, who can make more money, and who can win, because we're virtually offering the same services with almost all the same technologies and all the same notifications, et cetera, et cetera. So we kind of had to assume that if e-scooters was of interest, it would go through the same process that we have gone through, which is this RFI process and these contract negotiations. And so it's not that we were turned away from e-scooters or we hadn't thought about it. We're very aware of everything that's happening in the industry. It's that the process wasn't similar. So I don't think there would be another situation where a city were introduced e-scooters without us kind of knowing with any of our agreements.
Okay, so when I think exclusivity, I think to the product at hand, which in your case would be bicycles, rather than the solution, which is last mile mobility.
Yes, we tend to disagree. Our belief is that this should be an extension of current mobility transit. It would be great if people could hop off buses and get on bikes or get on scooters eventually. And you definitely don't need two competing bus lines within the same city. That would be a very interesting situation.
Interestingly, at the region, we're introducing private bus service up in the townships. But anyway, Councillor Veith, I know had a question.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski. Thank you for coming, Emmett. So maybe I need an update from staff. Where are we with this with the negotiation with Drop Bike? But do we have stations? I haven't noticed any in Waterloo. Is there a station or two anywhere within the city of Waterloo? And Kitchener and Cambridge as well, if you're working with the region. Thank you.
Yeah.
You want me to? So through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Veith. Drop Bike has not started to operate in Waterloo yet. The agreement has not been signed, so we've been working on that, and so that's where we're at. So they are planning to roll out in the spring of 2019.
Okay. And how about in Kitchener?
Nowhere in the region right now.
Yeah. We've been working through quite a long process. This started about last September. It's taken a long time to get everyone in the same rooms and get the contracts negotiated and make sure that the whole region and all 3 cities have been on board. So that has taken us over a year. Unfortunately, we were unable to launch this year, which was our original intention. But again, it's important to do this as properly as possible, not as quickly as possible.
Our solicitor, Mr. Ross, has some comments on that if he wants to come forward.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just with respect to treating everyone the same, I think was one of the themes of the delegation. It was not the City of Waterloo that required the RFP process. That was the region. We were actually willing to do a quick agreement for a pilot project with respect to bike share. I think that's a important distinction. With respect to the agreements themselves, we view that there is no overlap. I appreciate that the delegation says there is competition. However, their exclusivity is only for bike share itself.
Thank you, Councillor Veith. The next up, Councillor Maven.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Jaworski. Councillor Veith already asked my first question. My second question is, the data from the pilot, if it's approved, would be shared with the city, which makes it a public document. Would that not be helpful to your organization as well?
My organization?
Right. Drop my bill. You're saying if the results of the pilot, say the city does approve the pilot, and all the transactional data, all the information that is going to be collected as part of this pilot is shared with the city, and that automatically makes it public domain, which should make it available to you. Isn't that a benefit?
For somebody who would have never operated a bike share system before, I'm sure that would be a great benefit. I can almost guess exactly what the data is going to show. It's simply along a single path and their scooters. But I do understand what you're saying. Data sharing is very commonplace in the marketplace right now. Almost all cities, permitted or not, require a completely open data set. I guess there is some value to see what would happen, but I don't think Drop Bike themselves would be examining it because I'm almost sure we already know what it would say, a high utilization along the path.
Okay, thank you.
And Councillor Durrell has a question of staff. Seeing no further question of delegation, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councillor Durrell, please.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Jaworski, to staff. I'm just curious, it said one of the questions of the last delegate was around I guess, how do I put this? Will this put Drop Bike in jeopardy because we're using something else? Like, do you feel that would be? I mean, I'm coming to you from as economic development and as transportation. Do you feel having these two on the streets is a good thing, a bad thing? I'm sure you've looked at it. So, what's your
I'll take
analysis? You'll take that one? Okay, come on through Mr. Hewitton.
Mayor Jaworski to Councillor Durrell. From a transportation perspective, we do see different on different modes. So I have trouble understanding why it would impact a region-wide drop bike share system when we're operating an e-scooter in such a small location, or limited location. So anyway, that's my opinion. We haven't done the economic study on it, but that's my opinion.
Next up, Councillor Maven, please.
And these are for questions of staff. As far as collecting the feedback from the general public, the pedestrians and cyclists, what do we have in place for that? What are our plans?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, Councillor Maven. What we've established is a protocol where there's a local contact number and there's a performance time requirement to deal with any complaint or park scooter that shouldn't be in the location where it's supposed to be. So there's a responsibility on Lime to where that scooter is parked. And so that's just one component through the local office if a complaint were to be provided. We will get data on complaints and collisions and other metrics so we can start to understand that and work with teams on signage, wayfinding, Waterloo Region and others to figure out how just during the pilot. It said this is a test pilot. It's a living lab, and this is why we're working with the R&T Park to understand how to navigate this transportation within a very defined study area. And in terms of other agreements, you know, there's a very in-depth focus. There's very little studies out there specifically on e-scooters. There's an opportunity to do a UW research grant in terms of specifically looking on e-scooters that go in the depth as e-bikes. So in terms of lessons learned, this is what this pilot represents, as a learning opportunity to see how to best handle this transportation for other communities in addition to our own. So I think that just partially answers your question, Councillor Maven, in terms of what to, how do we manage this with the community. So we do have a mechanism for response time. There's a general number as well, if there's a complaint driven through that process, that notification is provided in line. We'll have to do commercially reasonable best efforts to address any problems. We're going to have our own city website as well that created. We have to wait for the decision and to understand what the direction this is going to go. But we have notifications on signage signs to say contact www.waterloo.ca/e-scooter pilot, and the whole education component. There could be a press release rolling in terms of education component for the community as well. So again, in terms of report council, I think that we'll come with a range of so our intention is, and our hope is that the systems can coexist together, but this is a phase one. Council will have the decision to move ahead come August 12th of next year to say, what does this data mean and what are the results? So I think there's some future decisions that need to be made, and we also left it open in terms of a pilot process. If others want to process better, both local and regional councils.
So just to phrase it in a couple words, basically we have a very passive collection system for people who want to comment, regular citizens who aren't participating as part of the marketing part, user part, would be it's a very passive approach to collecting data.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski. We believe, based off our understanding to date and talking to some other cities, is that we have a good system to gain information and feedback, and we're going to learn through the pilot process. And so I think our start is actually quite good. It's what do the results mean and how do we respond and how do we evolve the process. So I'd say that compared to this level of data sharing and understanding, is that from our experience through this, is that we have lots to learn and to report on and to move forward with. So I wouldn't say it's very passive. I would suggest that we will provide measures to enhance it and to manage it during the pilot, and that will increase over time.
Okay. What I'm thinking of, Ryan, is you're depending on people complaining or commenting or seeking out the website so they can find out, is there something on there about e-scooters? You're not talking about having people on the trails who possibly could be doing surveys, much like traffic counting, and just looking for feedback from people on the trails who might be in conflict. You know, direct citizens who are involved in the study, so to speak.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski. Thank you, Councillor Maven. That helps me better deliver the answer. Yes, we are just rolling up and rolling out, I should say, the consultation process. And so what does that look like? So again, dealing with the Waterloo Park Advisory Committee, dealing with all the transportation committees, these are all the collection points through the city advisory committees that we're going to just start to roll out. In terms of other opportunities with grant studies and other mechanisms and consultation with surveys, focused surveys, that is on our list to do as well. So I think we're just at the start, and as we start to compile the program and the consultation process, we'll have lots of feedback that will be generated, and we will be able to provide a very solid update to council if we're to move forward.
Okay, I'm glad to hear that. Now, the other question I have of staff then, it has to do with the helmets. The documentation that I read and the assurances I've got is helmets will be required and will be mandatory. And the vendor was very open about the fact that how can they do it? How can they enforce it? What are your plans?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Maven. It's the same as the bike helmet law that applies to people under 16. These scooters are for people over 18. So there is really no enforcement. If people choose, they can make a choice, and they're not going to get charged for not wearing a helmet. It's at their own risk that they don't wear it. So,
But the documentation, Phil, somewhat suggests that we are asking for it to be mandatory.
we can ask, and part of the education is say we're advising that it should be worn, just like we do with cyclists, but not everyone chooses to wear them.
So it's not.
I don't think it puts the city at any additional risk, if that's what you're concerned about.
No, I'm just the community at large.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we're done with the delegation. I think next up is Councillor Whaley.
I'd like to move the motion with a comment, if I may, Mayor, if I get a seconder.
Councillor Durrell. Go ahead, Councillor Whaley.
So, interesting talk about exclusivity, and we heard earlier that there is no exclusivity agreement. In fact, competition isn't discouraged in Waterloo. It's one of our hallmarks. So that's good that we talked about that. I just want to talk briefly about the focused diligence that Lime and staff have put around this project. It allows Waterloo to be the first in Canada, as we've heard, and one of the cool quotes that I picked up throughout the afternoon as we talked about this interesting transportation solution, best in class national leaders. I love to hear that. So as we move forward on this, I would like to especially say thanks to Ryan and his team. Ryan's been working on this through his holidays, through his weekends. He's really put a big effort through to make sure that Waterloo is the first in Canada. That's powerful. And to Nico, the project lead from Lime, welcome to Canada, my friend. Your cool, ultra cool California company is really, we're really happy to, if we're lucky, we're going to be happy to be a part of that. And you're going to find kindred spirits here in Canada to grow this business with you here. So hopefully, if we all agree, we can all say, welcome, Lime. And
comments from the Horseshoe. I know Councillor Durrell, or I know Councillor Veith wants to say. Councillor Veith, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I'm happy to support this. I think this is a very cool project. And the other thing is, I like a little bit about a talent attraction here. I know people are moving here from California and all over the place. So I think for us to offer this pilot project and within this, on this route where we're, people are moving here to work, and I think this is a really great idea. And if that's one more thing that economic development can promote to potential new employees to the region, then I think that's a great thing. So thank you for coming.
Councillor Durrell, Councillor Freeman.
Thank you. I guess I just want to say to the other delegation, I hope you're not discouraged, and I want to encourage you to continue to move forward. I think that bike share is important to this community. I'm supporting this because I think that this is exactly the kind of thing that we need in Waterloo, and I think that I'm excited that it's been brought forward. It's great to be able to, especially at this council level, to be able to bring these kind of opportunities to our city. And I always love a great pilot project. I'm a big fan of a pilot project because it definitely gets to cement whether something's great or it needs to be tweaked. So thank you.
Wonderful. Councillor Freeman.
Just building on Councillor Durrell's comments, I'm really keen to see how this is going to work, and so I'd like to see this pilot advanced. But I will say this isn't going to get people from end to end, and drop bike is. And so I really need drop bike, and I know that we're waiting for it, and lots of people are prepared to get in that saddle and go. So the sooner you can bring your havens here, the faster that people are going to be riding those. So I am hopeful that you can sign the agreement, and that there's a lot of folks out there that are quite prepared to cycle from North Waterloo to Cambridge, and I'm one of them. So bring on the bikes.
Councillor Henry, Councillor Maven, then.
I think the concept of a living lab, particularly in the research and technology park, makes a lot of sense. All of the words together say exactly that. And that's the point of having an idea quarter to be able to support ideas, and a research park to do some research. So I can think of no better place for doing research about this technology that other people have not done. I appreciate the other delegate who's come from Drop Bike. You earned your pay today, I am sure, in raising issues. My sense of what I was really hearing in all of that is that when the region-wide pilot for bike share comes to a close, and when this pilot runs its course, probably about the same time, we know there's a region-wide RFP and RFT, a tender that will be issued for bike sharing services, maybe adjusted at that time. And I am sure that Drop Bike, after all of the effort that they have put into trying to get that region-wide pilot off the ground, believes that they might be outbid on that tender period and are trying to get ahead of the curve. Maybe I'm wrong, but that sounds like what I would be worried about in their shoes. So we will see what happens. The opportunity of pilots will help, I think, us and the region later shape what that future tendering process will look like. And may the best ideas that fit best with all of our objectives win.
Thank you. Councillor Maven, please.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Jaworski. This is a pilot project, so I'm going to support it on that basis. I have some questions. There seems to be a lot of loose ends that we really haven't tied up yet, and that bothers me to some degree. I don't know, for example, on winter, how do e-scooters work in the wintertime? I know bicycles do work. I wouldn't ride one, but some people do, right, Councillor Freeman? So there's some questions, concerns, but all in all, it's a pilot, so let's find out how the pilot works.
Yeah, and just closing off things, I think Councillor Durrell and Freeman, echoed, we need bike share. Bike share is here to stay. We really need bike share. Nice to have a pilot project here. Thank you, Phil and Ryan, for putting this together, and also Mike for the partnership. Without the partnership, there'd probably be no pilot project coming here. With that, I'll call the question. All those in favor? That's all of us. None opposed. Thank you. And without further ado, item D, the Waterloo Advisory Committee on Active Transportation, motion from committee, prepared by Dr. Ann Crow, who I don't believe is here, and but we do have a couple of delegations, so we'll hear from them. First up, Daniel Brotherson. Welcome, Daniel.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair and Council. As mentioned, my name is Daniel Brotherston. I'm a resident of the City of Kitchener. I work in Waterloo, and I bike to work most days all year round. I'm very passionate about the issues of safety on our roads, especially for cyclists, so I'm honored to get to speak to you today about those issues. Thank you very much for your time. The uptown bike lanes are a great step forward for our city and our region. I was extremely excited when they were approved. It was, in fact, the last time I was in this room. I was heartened to see so much support for safe, protected bike infrastructure from the BIA, from Council, and from the public. I remember it was quite full. Since then, it has been a very long road through design and implementation and a long construction phase. Unfortunately, I have serious concerns today about the chosen implementation. While I am here as a private citizen today and do not speak for WACAT, that committee has passed a motion echoing these concerns. That motion, which I moved, is detailed in the report to Council. Others outside the committee also share these concerns. A people-protected bike lane protest occurred in these very lanes. It was organized by a father in response to seeing his child very nearly run over by a truck in these bike lanes. The media questioned the irony of this protest occurring in the new protected bike lanes, and I wonder what the cost to future prospects of protected bike infrastructure is in the region is for these lanes to be opposed even by cycling advocates. Some may fear that raising the bar on protected bike lanes too high will make them impossible to implement. But I fear that compromising the design such that they no longer provide adequate protection will turn public opinion away from further implementation. Last week at Lumen, a great event where a huge turnout demonstrated the enormous interest in safe infrastructure, I still observed in the short 30-minute time I was in Uptown, 3 cars parking in the bike lane and another 2 cars parked over the line in the parking bays such that they encroached substantially into the bike lane. This is during an event meant to showcase these bike lanes with multiple police officers and hundreds of people around. If even in these circumstances the bike lanes regularly see incursions from vehicles, it's clear to me that the protection of a roll curb is insufficient to keep vehicles out of the bike lanes. There seems to be no justification for roll curbs either. South of the railway tracks on King Street, the road was recently rebuilt with barrier curbs between the parking and the sidewalks. There I find no cars parked on the sidewalk. In fact, the only place I routinely see cars parked on the sidewalks is the very short section of roll curb built just around the railway tracks recently. In fact, there was a car parked there on the sidewalk as I arrived in Uptown today. I have repeatedly heard it suggested that enforcement is the way to fix this problem. I strongly disagree. First, I don't believe it is effective. I question whether any of the vehicles I saw in the bike lanes at Lumen would have received tickets. Certainly the taxi and rideshare vehicles, which entered the bike lanes only for a few minutes, would not have been there by the time bylaw arrived if there had been a complaint made. But during that time, they still impeded dozens of cyclists each. As for the vehicles parked partially in the parking lanes, I don't know what standard bylaw uses to enforce, but it's probably a judgment call. Is the vehicle far enough into the bike lane? But those drivers partially blocking the bike lane still make it feel tight and unsafe to cyclists. Worse, those vehicles will sometimes have passengers who, instead of opening the door over the buffer zone meant to protect the bike lane from car doors, will instead open the doors directly into the bike lane, perhaps without checking for cyclists. Secondly, enforcement is simply wasteful. It is an ongoing cost financially to the city, to the users of the bike lane and of the parking bays, and to the politicians who will hear from angry constituents who get ticketed. Providing more protection will reduce the need for enforcement. Everyone will be happier. Cyclists who feel safer, drivers who are less likely to get a ticket, taxpayers who don't have to cover the ongoing enforcement costs, and politicians who will get fewer angry phone calls from ticketed parkers. We have an opportunity here and now to correct this deficiency for the second phase of the project, but we must act quickly. Projects are planned well in advance, and I believe phase 2 from Bridgeport Avenue to Central Ave is planned for construction next year. I hope we can consider how much time there is to complete a study, if one is considered, before a decision must be made here. Some will question whether the city has any say in the matter. I also sit on the regional ATAC committee and made this same motion at that committee. The councillor representatives on that committee moved and seconded to defer that motion until regional staff could report back with the City of Waterloo's position on that matter. So clearly the city's position is important right now. What will staff be reporting back to ATAC? Please consider whether the a dozen cars I personally observed on my travels home from work in the last week is a strong enough signal to make this decision. Is a report from WACAT asking for consideration of better protection a good signal? Whether the 50 people who came out to ask for better protection by forming a people-protected bike lane protest a strong enough signal? Or whether a video of a small child nearly being run over by a truck is a strong enough signal? What will staff report back to regional ATAC? I hope that these lanes can be made a success to be repeated in the region. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Daniel. We have 2 delegations here. So first up for the first delegation, we have questions. Councillor Durrell. Okay, questions of the current delegation? Just while you're up, Daniel, I think I have my own feelings when we came to when we approved the first design, as you would know, we received the input from a lot of the cycling community saying this is a design to build, and it's built, and now there's concerns around it. But it is what was designed, was built. I actually think it's just that much of the cycling community. There's that enthusiasm for cycling, and things have just changed so quickly. Maybe you could give me your reflections on that.
So I certainly agree that things have changed, and there's been more demand for more protection. I do think that, how do I say, we aren't the experts on how this design should look. We can come and say after the fact, oh, this is a problem. And although I may have raised the roll curbs as a question during the original design, it's not up to me. I'm not the expert here. All I can say is now that I see them, I know there's a problem. And I think that it's fortunate we have the opportunity to reconsider in the further implementation of the next phase.
Fair enough. Perfect. Thank you. Seeing no further questions, thank you, Daniel. And thanks for your patience in the last item. Next up, Scott Weldon. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thanks for your time. Excuse me. So my name is Scott Weldon, and I'm a resident of Waterloo, not far from here. I teach with the Waterloo Region District School Board, and by no means am I a traffic engineer or expert of any sorts, but I guess I could call myself an expert cyclist in that I use cycling lanes, whatever's out there, every single day. My own children are out there most days. I currently run a bike club at my school that I teach at, where we go trail riding on Wednesdays. The kids have a great time. We obviously stay off the roads. We're in Kitchener, so we do find paths that we can go on. I've taught kindergarten, where I started a bike club, surprise, and we had the kids out riding bikes. I mean, there's so much enthusiasm, physical activity that can happen on a bicycle. And I find that with the new uptown lanes, so much was done right, but that last piece of protection was missed. And I knew all along, or I thought all along, that something was going to be put in place, and then they were rolled out. And I didn't see that last piece of protection put in place. And I thought it was just maybe missed. But then as I do more research, I find that, the roll curb was the plan for multiple reasons. And so then when riding them with my own kids, I noticed right away a car trying to parallel park and almost hit my son. And I mean, sure, it wasn't a high-speed altercation, but it could have been disastrous. And I thought, I see an issue here. And so then a few months later, you may have seen on Twitter and the media the picture of my daughter beside a large pickup truck southbound on the lanes in front of the Hoother. And it just shows the close proximity, that a 6-year-old is still having to deal with 3,000 pounds of metal on what we're calling a separated bike lane in the region. So I'm just really concerned that if this idea of separated cycling infrastructure is carried on throughout all projects, and that if a 6-year-old still has to contend with 4,000 pounds of metal in our separated cycling lanes in the region, I think we've got an issue. I think the picture speaks for itself. And I know cities around the world, cities around Canada, also in the world, are putting in physical protection. And I don't see why we can't. Cities that receive more snowfall than we get are putting in physical protection. And I think that we need to look at our challenges and not mitigate the safety aspect of the system. And I think we need to keep working towards a fully protected system so that even an advocate like myself who loves riding, who encourages children from 3 years old up to ride a bike, shouldn't have to contend with huge vehicles. It should be totally separated. And I know in our uptown grid, it's a busy area, so we really need to, nail that part. Sure, we can work out from there, but these are the downtown core areas that really should have the best, grade A cycling infrastructure. So I just like the motions to be put forward to council, to regional council, to put in these physical barriers on all separated infrastructure, and maybe have the same language and the same ideas, so that if you have a project and you want to put in safe, protected infrastructure, you choose protection A, protection B, or protection C. It's not roll curb is part of the protection in one of the safe, protected areas. So I think it just needs to be cleared up as to what is protected, and users of all ages and abilities are using these lanes every day.
Thank you, Scott. I think in the original one, I think it said it's protected by the parked cars, which is, anyway, that's what it said. But I think if you look at how much progress we've made over the past 15 years of going from a Kmart with a parking lot in front of it to a beautiful uptown square to a beautiful LRT to a beautiful two-lane road and accommodating everyone, certainly a lot of progress has been made, but, work's never done, it seems here. Councillor Durrell, did you have a question? I can't remember.
Just a comment, I guess, after.
Okay, any questions for the delegate? Thank you for what you do for the active transportation with the youth, because I think that's the way forward. If we start with the youth, they'll bring along family, mom, dad, and that kind of thing. So thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, Scott. Questions or comments?
Yeah, I guess, it makes me mad as hell that these cars are parking on our segregated bike lanes. And, I think when we went back to this at the very beginning, because when I was elected in 2010, Streetscape had already been sitting for 3 or 4 years before that, maybe 2 years before that. And so in 2010, we realized that we were going to the only way to get segregated bike lanes on was to take away one lane of parking. And it was extremely controversial. And, this whole process, it was not easy to redo King Street. And, I appreciate that our delegates talked about Lumen, because, really, Uptown's back in action again. But the amount of consultation and experts that we worked with to get King Streetscape right, and there's just a part of me that's, there's a couple of stupid drivers that are making dumb mistakes by parking in a bike lane and, and scaring kids and scaring cyclists. It makes me really mad. So, I appreciate that this is coming to us for information. I guess my question to staff would be, I know that this is moving all the way up to University Street. What is the process right now? You're obviously speaking with the region. We're doing this project together. We took a year off construction so that Uptown could just get its groove back. But what's the next line of process, and just so we're all up to date?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Durrell. So the region is committed now to do, they're calling it a 7-day video inspection and speed analysis of what's happening on King Street right now. So a very intense review of where the conflicts are, and so from that, then we can best decide on the current section if there's some implementation, whether it's bollards or some other thing like that, to help define where the bike lanes are. Might be more markings on the bike lanes, because there are long gaps right now between the markings that people just walking, quite often they don't even realize that they are bike lanes. So there probably are some very easy things to do, so we'll be able to determine those things. Going forward on the next phase, we have time. If we decide from this analysis that a change is required, then we could implement that change for next spring construction on the section from Bridgeport to Elgin, and then from there up to University the following year. So there is time to make changes, to make improvements if the data shows it, where we can do that or how we can do that best.
Follow up. Phil and I sat side by side for all of these streetscape consultations, and I distinctly remember when they brought forward the sand-colored cement compared to the silver cement that was, and that there would be a good it would be very clear what was a bike lane and what wasn't. and I guess it just wasn't the right. We didn't get the right mix of contrast.
Again, through you, Mayor Jaworski, there is a contrast. Perhaps I think it's the actual markings, particularly where the spur line crosses King. People are walking in what we call it's combined cross ride, crosswalk, and that actually brings pedestrians right into the bike lane if you're going on the west side of King. So I think some additional marking in there, and we also notice where the transit stop is, people are standing in the bike lane. So again, I think those are fairly easy things to improve. So marking the bike lanes more frequently is one thing. The color, again, is more difficult to change. So what we do notice is the cross rides on the road crossings, they're bright green. They do stand out, and I think those are hard to miss. So I think that's the other thing we'll look at for the next phase, if there's something we can do for better marking, signage, all of that to make that better. But we're not ignoring the existing section. If there's things we can do to make it safer, we are looking at a bunch of options.
And finally, I just wanted to address, there's hundreds of kids that go to McGregor Public School that are using these segregated bike lanes every single day. And obviously there are other people that are using them as well. And I just want to be careful about the language that we're using. Mr. Weldon, I bike uptown with my kids too, and I know we are the mama and papa bears when our kids are out. But I think we need to be careful about using language of, a kid was almost struck and killed. Like we need to, we need to be, I'm sure it was scary, and I can't even imagine what it was like. But at the same time, we are aware of our surroundings, and I think that it's really important for our bylaw and our police to be on top of it and protect the kids. But also we need to use language that's not scares these kids from getting on these bike lanes to go to McGregor, in my opinion.
So I have a question for Phil. Just on sidewalk riding, I know it's not encouraged and sort of not desirable, but can little kids like 3- and 4-year-old ride on the sidewalk in Uptown?
Absolutely. Anybody with a bike wheel less than 20 inches is allowed to ride on a sidewalk. That doesn't contravene a bylaw, and a parent accompanying them can ride on the sidewalk with them. So a suggestion...
Any sidewalk you're talking about?
Yes, any sidewalk, and even uptown would be fine. So another suggestion was raised by someone, a parent could ride on the bike lane right beside the smaller child riding on the sidewalk, which separates them even further from parked cars or the other conflicts. So,
thank you, Phil. Further questions of staff? Seeing none. Councillor Freeman.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski. So I think that we've received this report as for us to receive it, but I would like to move a motion that we receive it and then advance this report to the region, and ask staff to work with regional staff to think about any things that we can do to help address the concerns in the report, and also to use as information for the design of the extension of the bike lanes in the future phase.
Moved by Councillor Freeman, second by Councillor Burke. Any further discussion? Councillor Henry.
I think I'll just briefly say I appreciate Councillor Freeman's redirection and encouragement of staffs to work together. I think that's right. I appreciate the information that Mr. Hewitson has provided that indicates that, as all things are in cities, it's a work in continual progress and improvement. We learn as we go. I appreciate hearing from the delegates and all the other folks who have chimed in on this. The plural of anecdote is not data, but it is interesting and suggests the need for data. And so that's why I appreciate very much that staffs, ours and the region, are looking at a data-informed approach to help guide us forward, because you learn as you go. And we have an opportunity to continue to improve our cycling infrastructure in the city. And I'd add the pilot that the region intends, and I desperately hope does begin next year, which will test a variety of modes of doing separation in Waterloo, will also be very helpful data for us as a community as we take the opportunity to build more separation for cyclists to encourage people to leave their cars at home.
Thank you. Councillor Durrell.
I'm just struggling here, Councillor Freeman, with passing. It's not a report, and it's not. But you're just saying we're passing for information.
Yeah, like I'm just saying that we would advance this to the region for information. Yeah, I'm just referring it.
Okay.
I mean, that's what the committee asked for. The committee has asked that that we lobby regional council, and I think one of the tools to do that is to advance this report, and to ask staff to look at the data that they have and think about some of the ways in which these concerns can be addressed.
So in it says the committee wishes to encourage council to request that regional council update the design of future phases to include barrier curbs or similar updated separation from traffic.
Right.
So, I mean, what our staff are telling us is that they're looking into all of this and that they're working together. I'm just wondering if we're...
I think Councillor Durrell, the committee just wants to make a motion and put it clearly on the table and to support the work that our staff is doing in advancing conversations with the region.
I think what we're saying here is that it can consider ways it can be safer, that we agree there's probably opportunities to make things safer, including retrofitting, as Mr. Hewitson said, and for us to endorse that the current standard of as is, don't leave it as is. Consider further options to make it even safer.
And so shouldn't our staff be bringing forward a recommendation then, taking into consideration what a committee is bringing for us, and then we would pass the staff recommendation?
The way I see it is we're ready to refer it now. I think we all agree that there's opportunities for, we're not engineers, well, some of us are engineers here, but we're not that kind of engineer here.
Well, no, but our engineers should be the ones that I think are talking to us about this. And I mean, even the delegates said that as well, is that they're not engineers or so that I think I'm happy to refer this for information, but I think our staff are the ones that should be telling us what our recommendations are.
I think that's the next step.
Okay.
But we're not there yet. And I think that spending money to do that work, it needs to be scoped, and that's something that staff needs to do, and this will help advance that.
So, no further questions? I'll call the...
Well, can I just ask
a
question,
go
staff?
ahead. Yeah. So you want further question?
Does this work for you then, the way that it's written? Because I want to make sure that we're empowering you and not handcuffing you.
So through Mayor Jaworski. So our perspective right now is we're not sure what the right solution is. So it could be curbs, it could be bollards and so forth. So we also are waiting to hear back from the designer, who's a professional engineer who's designed a lot of cycling facilities, again, on what her experience with various types of protection. So we are going to look at a number of things based on what we see actually happening on the street. So I think what Councillor Freeman has suggested is what we are planning to do.
So this motion works for you then?
Yes.
Okay.
All those in favor? It's all of us. Thank you, and thanks for the committee for bringing this forward. We have a formal public meeting coming up now, and just on your desk you'll see on page 67 the correct version is on your desk on the holding provision. This is a formal public meeting to consider zoning bylaw amendment Z1811, lifting of a holding provision at 924 Herb Street West, West Waterloo Retail GP Limited. Any persons who want further notice of this application, including passage of any bylaw, should sign the appropriate register in the binder located at the rear of the council chambers. Will the clerk please advise council of the method used to give notice of the meeting and the dates notice was given?
Notice was advertised in the Waterloo Chronicle on August 23rd, 2018, and mailed or emailed on August 20th, 2018, to all property owners within 120 meters of the subject property. No informal public meeting was held.
The planner, Dominic Simpson, welcome Dominic, is here for questions. Anybody have any questions for Dominic on this application? Councillor Maven.
Thank you, Mayor Jaworski, and through you. So what this will do is open up further development on the Costco site. Is that correct? So it says, it's somewhat ironic, we're taking a parking lot and we're saying we have to provide 262 spaces, when actually we're going to be shrinking the amount of parking that's already available there. Is that not correct?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, yeah. There was a bylaw passed a couple years ago. I can't recall the exact bylaw, but that allowed a certain extension of parking for the current Costco. And with the new development, you're correct, we will be removing a section of that parking and developing the rest of the lands. The current developable lands are a lot larger than where that parking lot, that extension is. So there is definitely a lot of room for that future parking, if I'm making sense.
Right, but part of the land that's being developed or proposed to be developed, at least when the holding provision's removed, is currently parking lot. Is that not reasonable?
A portion of it is,
yeah,
yes.
Yeah, okay.
I wish I had the site plan with me.
No, that's fine. I just wanted confirmation of that.
Right, yeah. But most of the land currently is just dirt. Only a very small portion of the developable lands are currently parking.
Okay. And a follow-up question then on, and I don't know if I was communicating with Mr. Rapp this afternoon, but the proposed Columbia Street extension, what's the status of that? Mr. Rapp?
Through Mayor Jaworski to Councillor Maven. Just for clarity, the Columbia Street extension is being finalized actually right this week. We're starting to move over to our complete profile, which will be 2 lanes both directions. But I think you're referring probably to the collector road that runs between Columbia Street and Herb, and perhaps the timing of that, because that will connect, as I said, Herb to Columbia. And that, we already have those monies in the capital budget already. We're waiting for some of the planning to catch up. We have draft plan subdivision, I believe, has now been formally submitted as a complete application, so we'll be going through that process, and ultimately that would allow for the creation of that road running from Herb up to Columbia Street. But the Columbia Street extension, as you asked, we're just finishing that up basically this week.
Okay, and you're quite correct. I'm thinking of the north-south road from Herb Street. I think that runs into the first roundabout.
The first, that's correct, the eastern roundabout, yes.
Okay. And I guess the other question would be the road, or the proposed road that's coming through the boardwalk properties. It's going north-south as well. It'll connect with Herb Street.
Again, through Mayor Jaworski, that would refer to that as the bypass road, as we've been calling it. So we do have identified within our development charge bylaw, and again within our capital budget, our share of the monies to create that bypass road, which would then ultimately alleviate some of the traffic that's on the Ira Needles and Herb Street intersection currently.
So these traffic mitigation issues, I guess my underlying question is it time to release the holding provision now? Or do we wait until we get the traffic solutions a little bit more in place?
Again, through Mayor Jaworski, I believe it is. that the conditions of the holding were very specific, that talked about certain measures being completed, which is the roundabouts as we've talked, a portion of Platinum, and an updated traffic study, which has been reviewed. And it's interesting, we're talking about traffic professionals. In this case, there have been 4 sets of traffic professionals. There's the BA group that prepared this study, the region professional staff, city professional staff, and then I retained, again, a third party to ensure things were done satisfactorily. And that person, that individual, worked on input in the terms of reference for the study, reviewed the study, and then concluded in a letter to myself that it would be fine to release the holding provision.
So just, and Cam, I can say this to you, but so the consultants are saying there's not going to be a traffic problem out there. That's what I'm hearing.
That's right. The transportation professionals have indicated that the intersection along Herb will be working to satisfactory levels as assigned by the region, whether it's A, B, C, D, E, or F. They're indicating that it will be working at an acceptable level.
Thank you.
Okay. Further questions of staff? Seeing none. I will now ask any registered delegations to come forward. We have one registered delegation, Kevin Thomason. Welcome, Kevin.
Welcome.
Long time no see.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, thank you. Just before we get started here, there is no binder at the back to sign in at for additional information. And it was also very challenging to work on this when the information wasn't released to the public until Thursday, and then, or late Thursday, and then the websites, the city's website servers were down Saturday and Sunday, not able to actually get any information until this morning. So I'm not complaining. I'm just kind of stating that it's been a bit of a tricky one, and that we're doing our best here with very limited working technology, information sign up or such. But anyways, I'll formally get started now. Honorable Mayor, members of council, and guests, my name is Kevin Thomason, and I live at 1115 Cedar Grove Road, Waterloo, on the northwest side of this site. It pains me to have to stand here again today, yet again regarding the rushing of these developments before the basic required road infrastructure is in place. Several years ago, many citizens, neighborhood associations, and community groups stood here and expressed serious concern about the traffic implications of Costco and the surrounding big box developments. The traffic situation on the west side of Waterloo is already challenging enough and has been the focus of many, many meetings and studies, such as the West Side Waterloo Multimodal Study, and have been underway for years now, trying to figure out how to deal with such big volumes of traffic and such large new developments in such a huge section of the city that has alarmingly few roads or options to get around. After a long process, a very clear arrangement was agreed upon in 2015, where the construction and opening of the Costco store and gasoline retail complex would be permitted once some of the infrastructure, such as the 2 roundabouts to get into the site, were in place. But additional surrounding big box development would be under a holding provision until other transportation infrastructure, widely agreed upon as required, could be built, such as the widening of Herb Street to 4 lanes and the construction of the Golf Course Road, Platinum Drive, a new roadway planned for more than 15 years that would connect from Herb Street to Columbia Street adjacent to Costco, providing at least a second route for city residents to reach the site. However, despite almost all of these road improvements not being completed, and the Costco still only reachable by one already heavily congested 2-lane road, Herb Street, somehow staff are recommending the holding provision be removed and the development be allowed to proceed on tens of thousands of square feet of additional big box developments that will likely draw hundreds of more cars daily to this area. This council put these holding provisions in place a few years ago, knowing exactly what the intent and purpose was, simply to ensure that additional development didn't proceed until the required infrastructure was in place. And yet somehow, despite Herb Street still being only 2 lanes, with 4-lane upgrades not expected until 2020 at the earliest, with Platinum Drive and Copper Drive still being dead-end streets with no connections, or any alternative routes, and no public transit of any sort yet, With no active transportation and not even a sidewalk to the site yet, somehow staff is recommending the removal of the holding provision entirely, going against the sole purpose of it in the first place. Given that almost none of the required road upgrades are in place, and the only basis that I can find for this attempt to remove the holding provision is a traffic study done by the developer back in March 2017, more than a year and a half ago, and just weeks after Costco opened. This study is closer to ancient history than it is to the current conditions at Costco. Since March 2017, Costco has sold hundreds, if not thousands, of new memberships to the store. Gas bar traffic alone has likely doubled in this time of the study, simply judging by the amount the lineups have increased and their incredible lengths. Most days, drivers are lined up 4, 5, and 6 or more cars deep across 8 lanes of 2 gas pumps each. This traffic study, done in the worst weather months of the year on mainly rural roads, is not going to be representative of traffic most of the year, particularly not in an area changing as rapidly as the west side. This study assumes a 1% annual rate of increase in traffic, while the adjacent Wilmot line has actually seen a 300% increase in traffic over the past decade. Similar to the original traffic study done by this developer, there are numerous errors and inexplicable numbers that any area resident would seriously question. However, rather than argue the minutiae of this dated study, reality is showing each day just how wrong this study is. When Costco executives flew up to Waterloo on their jet back in April 2014, they promised that the store site would be designed in a manner that there would never be backups of traffic out onto the surrounding roads, something that is commonplace at so many other Costcos with gas bars. They offered assurances that traffic would never be backlogged out onto Herb Street and that their comprehensive internal collector road system would ensure it was never an issue. However, ask anyone who frequents this area and they will tell you how traffic regularly stretches down their laneway and into the first roundabout. Once this first roundabout becomes congested, it very quickly causes issues down Herb Street, since the regional road is still only a single lane in either direction on either side of the Costco site. The main problem isn't the roundabouts. They work well, and we wouldn't even have the roundabouts here if it wasn't for all the community members speaking out against the original proposed intersections. The issue is the internal collector road at Costco that is very poor design and is not even corrected in any of the new proposed expansion. In fact, the expansion will likely make the situation far worse and result in a very dangerous situation for pedestrians and the main crosswalk on the site. Instead of branching out into the site like a tree with many different routes to spread out shoppers seeking parking spaces across the parking lots, this entrance road instead dumps them all on the very congested front door of Costco, where drivers are trying to drop off people, pick up large items, and get in the front door with their shopping carts. Coming in the main entrance, going left takes you to the loading docks and away from the entrance, not what anyone wants, and very few turn left. Going right leads to the massive gas bar queue. At some days, this entirely easterly route is completely blocked by so many cars waiting for gas. The primary option taken by most shoppers is to go right and then an immediate left. This is usually congested with shoppers waiting for cars, drivers waiting to turn into the closest spot, trying to get to the front door, etc. There is no other options, and things just slow down, then back up, then spill out onto Herb Street. One can't even reach Platinum Drive because of the backlog in the first roundabout prevents you from getting to the second roundabout. And it is an 8-kilometer drive at a minimum to Kitchener, then to Petersburg, then to St. Agatha, and back to Costco. Or all the way up to Wideman Road and back down the Wilmot line to try to approach Platinum Drive from the west. Worse yet, the plans for the new expansion do little to improve this internal bottleneck, and instead place a major building right up to this edge, this intersection, potentially blocking critical sight lines. Even more confounding is the new crosswalk that is likely to be the main pedestrian thoroughfare between Costco and all these new stores that is being placed right in the middle of this already congested intersection. So now there will be all kinds of pedestrians, shoppers with the large carts, etc., to dodge as you turn right and then wait to turn left. This is not only incredibly dangerous, but will slow traffic movement through this bottleneck even more now, as all the cars trying to get into the site, as well as all the cars trying to leave the gas bar, will have to wait for pedestrians to cross through the middle of this internal intersection. It is incredibly poor planning, and likely only a matter of time until pedestrians are hit by cars or killed by rushing drivers, particularly with the poor sight lines, unless, of course, traffic is so gridlocked it's hardly moving at all, such as it currently is in the current situation. I should also note concerns about constructing these buildings so close to the road that it appears there will either be no sidewalk or no grassy boulevard if there is a sidewalk, just a building a few feet from a road. Already we've had issues at the Ira Needles and Herb Street intersection, where stores were built so close to the road that it has proven impossible to make any sort of improvements or upgrades to the roundabout on the northeast and southwest corners. I would like to contrast this to the nearby boardwalk developments that have been strongly focused on community, with an excellent internal road network, utilizing several roundabouts to ensure smooth internal traffic flow. The boardwalk developments have been built with wide sidewalks, ponds, grassy areas, water features, splash pads, public art, and an effort to connect with the surrounding community. Despite much larger stores and far more traffic, I've never seen boardwalk traffic backed up onto Ira Needles Boulevard or causing any delays. Perhaps an internal roundabout, better parking design, and more parking route options, and more than one two-lane road to reach this development is what is needed here. I would like to clarify that I'm not anti-Costco. I'm very supportive of Costco and have spent thousands of dollars annually at their warehouses around the world since 1989. What this is about is good planning and ensuring the developer eager to build as soon as possible doesn't destroy or compromise our community in the process. We have only one western entrance and exit to our city. Already the west side of Waterloo faces considerable traffic challenges daily, with few solutions on the horizon. There are many other new subdivisions with thousands of new homes planned, new retail developments, new condo towers, new seniors' homes, and new employment lands that need to have the capacity to employ thousands of people if our city is to succeed in the years and the decades ahead. There is no need to hurry to remove the holding provision. The developer built Costco in just 90 days. They don't need years of lead time now. We also know how slow governments can be, and that with Herb Street widening not slated until 2020 at the earliest, we don't want a situation where the developer is forcing stores to be open before the needed roadway infrastructure improvement is in place. In conclusion, good planning is hard. I urge Council to vote against the staff recommendation to remove the holding provision and instead take the time to work with the developer to do a proper updated traffic study, to find better solutions for the issues already being experienced and proven daily at the site, to come up with a better design for the proposed Phase 2 big box stores that facilitates a better traffic flow and addresses the dangerous crosswalks, and to ensure the opening of these stores doesn't occur until the transportation infrastructure needed, such as the widening of Herb Street, the connection of Platinum Drive to Columbia Street, and the active transportation infrastructure that the city and region have agreed for years is needed, is in place. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin, as always. Questions of the delegate? Councillor Maven.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski. Kevin, where would you put the roundabouts that you proposed? I mean, the one's obvious where the T intersection is.
Yeah, I think part of the issue comes from the fact that there are really only three entrances in it. If you look, once you come in the roundabout, you're forced to either go right up past the front door or all the way to the western side of the lot and basically back out by the loading docks, or all the way to the east side to where the gas bar is. I think somehow there needs to, as I described it earlier, needs to be like a tree. You need to come up the trunk, and there needs to be a whole variety of branches to spread that traffic out, to disperse it throughout the parking lot in a far better manner and get people to where they want to go. I'm not a parking designer, but it just seems that we've got this one bottleneck, and that the problem isn't on the regional roads, and perhaps some of the traffic studies are fine. The problem is with this internal access and it really leading to right to the front door of Costco. That is always a busy bottleneck in any plaza.
So if the design was changed, just hypothetically,
yeah.
Would you be okay then with releasing the holding provision?
It's a good question. I think yes, I would believe if we can come up with a design that works and we can get these things built. Once it's built, release the holding provision. But the holding provision was put in very simply to hold things until the required infrastructure was in place. And it seems that there's, this is a complex area. We need to get it right. I realize the challenges of the hydro towers and hydro corridors and trying to align regional governments and rural townships like Wilmot or the city of Kitchener. There's a lot of places at play here. And I think in the end, we need to make sure we get this right. And we only have one road. We only have one chance. And already folks on the west side are paying the price from a lot of development that's been pushed out there that have been far more successful over the past decade and a half than anyone ever suggested. You know, it would be great, for example, to have the results from the West Side multimodal study that I know is still underway and still working. You know, that too is another piece of the puzzle that has many of the answers for how are we going to grow and how do all these different developments fit together. Your questions previously just on that extra connector road from the boardwalk, which was never envisioned, but then again is a great solution. How does that tie into things? Because I don't think that was counted in the traffic studies, because I'm not even quite sure that was on the books or even in discussion back in March 2017.
Thank you very much.
And just as a quick pause, to get clarification from planning staff or Commissioner Camrap, really I'm kind of hearing two different issues here. There's the holding provision, but the delegate has also talked about the internal planning of the parking and that, and I don't really see that in the holding provision, so I'm trying to figure out what we can weigh in on at this time.
Again, you're correct, Mayor Jaworski. The internal circulation is not referenced in the holding provision, and the internal circulation, we've not approved it yet. It's going through, it will be going through our typical site plan process, which the boardwalk went through, which allowed for that traffic situation, parking situation to work as well as it does versus other large centers within the region. So we have not approved this yet. This is a submission subject to the holding being removed, and then our staff, as they always do, will go through a process to take a look at all the site circulation, the flow of pedestrians, cars, and look at what is the best way to accommodate the proposed traffic. That's what they typically do, but it is not a public process, and it comes after the zoning has been approved and in place, not before.
Okay, and then with respect, and this might be back to Dominic, but then with respect to development, so we would go from here through site plan, and at that point, when would there be active development and construction? And that might be a question for the developer. So Dominic or Camp?
I can speculate, but there are representatives here of the Rice Group, but I would suggest that they would probably put in some underground services this fall, so they would not be disrupting the Christmas traffic, and then would proceed with starting construction sometime late spring and proceeding through. That would be my guess, but again, we do have representatives of the development. They may wish to clarify that.
Okay, and I will look to them to see if they'd be offering themselves up as a delegate later. Okay, so now back to questions of the current delegate, now they've got that cleared up. Any further questions for Kevin from Council? Seeing none. Thanks very much, Kevin.
Excellent. Thank you.
Mr. Thomason was our only registered delegate. Is there anyone else present here today who wishes to speak to this application? Please provide your name and municipality of residence for the record. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Councillors. My name is Daryl Bird. My municipality of residence is Toronto, Ontario. Okay. So thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I'd like to provide firstly, some clarification to Councillor Maven's question regarding the parking that's currently on this Phase 2 land. It is temporary parking in nature only. It was only contemplated to be a temporary parking facility. We do have approval from zoning approval and approval from Hydro One to expand Costco's parking field into the Hydro corridor, and that would be occurring next spring. So there's no proposal right now to remove the temporary parking until after the holiday season. The desire from Rice Group is to proceed with this lifting of the hold. So as Commissioner Rapp had stated, we'd like to start pre-servicing of the site this fall. And what that would allow us to do is to put that driveway into the site into its ultimate approved condition. So there's utility crossings right now. So right now it's a drivable surface. It's safe, but it's not. It doesn't have all the line painting and the turning lanes that would be in the ultimate configuration. Because as servicing crosses that driveway, it's going to be ripped up, and then they'll put it in the final condition. So lifting the H symbol will facilitate, hopefully, finalization of the site plan, allowing for the necessary site circulation improvements to occur. So thank you for your time. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Great. No, thank you for coming up. I think this will be very helpful. Councillor Burke is first up.
Okay.
I guess my question would be, when would you ultimately like to have this completely built out? What's the time frame there?
So they want to start the site servicing this fall, and that would allow Rice Group to start constructing buildings in spring, summer of next year.
And again, when would you expect it would be completely built out? Finished?
2019, 2020.
Okay.
Further questions at this time? Seeing none, thank you very much. And if there are no more delegations, this formal public meeting is concluded and the application is now open to council for a motion and debate. Councillor Veith has a question. Go ahead.
Thank you, and I want to thank Kevin for coming today, and even with all the barriers to get here. So I just want to be clear here that Council in 2014 put this holding provision on this this future employment land until all of those, like the Herb Street was widened and Platinum went through. No, okay. So, like, I want to be clear that.
Ask your question. We'll probably go to Joel at the back. He's anxious to answer.
So, because I just know that it's crazy out there on Saturdays. People that are going to the landfill and apparently
waste management.
Sorry, that's backed up the dump, as Councillor Whaley calls it. So I just want to. I can't imagine any more traffic out there for these poor future businesses unless there's better traffic flow. So I just want to be clear on what we're actually lifting. Is it just those roundabouts, or are there other bits?
Who wants to take it? Do you want Joel? Thanks.
Through Mayor Jaworski to Councillor Veith. When the Costco applications were advanced to council, there was some discussion around the mechanisms for lifting the holding. What should that look like? Should it be full road construction? Should it be various road improvements? And ultimately, through the intermunicipal board, it was settled that the transportation impact studies would have to be updated, and any physical and financial infrastructure required for the surrounding road network to accommodate the additional development to be in the region's hands or in the city's hands. So that's the requirement that the holding provision sets out. We have to have the physical and financial resources in our hands or in the region's hands within the surrounding road network to accommodate the additional development. The range of development that's being proposed is somewhere in the order of 65 to 70,000 square feet. So it's not a lot of development in terms of the buildings. For context, the Best Buy in North Waterloo is about 25,000 square feet. So it's about collectively 3 Best Buys in total is what's being advanced in terms of square footage. So ultimately what the updated transportation study did is it looked at the surrounding road network and determined what improvements would be required. And as the region has completed its EA and is expanding Herb to 4 lanes, essentially what the traffic study has said is that if you release the holding provision now, it will allow certain site improvements to occur. So as Mr. Rapp indicated, those internal site improvements to be advanced as site servicing and other works come forward, and it would allow this Phase 2 lands to be built out concurrent with the improvements to Herb Street. And once Herb Street is expanded to 4 lanes, the transportation study essentially states that there's enough capacity within the road to accommodate this additional 65 to 70,000 square feet of commercial uses. So the requirements for the extension of Platinum Drive, those were never fully requirements. While they were discussed back in 5 or 6 years ago, they were not instituted as part of the requirements for lifting the holding provision. So hopefully that provides a little bit more context for council.
Yeah, it does. So Herb Street doesn't have to be built out. Did you just say that Herb Street has to be built out to accommodate these 3 Best Buy sized places?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Veith. Yeah, the traffic study essentially says is once Herb Street is constructed to 4 lanes, then there's capacity in the transportation network to accommodate this additional development. What the request is to allow the holding to be removed to allow both Herb Street to be constructed at the same time this Phase 2 is being constructed. So they basically come online at the same time. That's what's being requested of council.
Councillor Durrell.
I remember a while back when we put the hold on, reading the traffic report, and it was something like it was 76 seconds that the people were waiting. That the traffic report said people would be waiting. Am I right, Joel? Do I remember that correctly, or Cam?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Durrell. I specifically don't remember the numbers, but that time frame was likely consistent with the level of service conversation that was going on at the time with the traffic studies. So that 76, 90 second delay is likely in the ballpark.
Councillor Veith.
So that traffic study was done in 2017. That's the one that we're using here? Yes. So if that traffic study was redone, say this, like a year later, maybe maybe if it was redone like in May this year, would it be different?
Joel.
Somebody.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Veith. As Mr. Rapp indicated, there was a fair number of transportation professionals that were involved in this study. One of the requirements for the study was to project out and use information as to how Costco grows. So they have proprietary information in-house that looks at how within each of the markets their stores grow, and all of those factors were integrated into this transportation study looking forward. So my belief is if you had the transportation work done again, those assumptions and those factors based on the actual data of Costco's growing throughout southwestern Ontario, that's all been fed into this system, into this report to help drive the conclusions that are being brought forward to council. So would the outcome change based on my discussions with the transportation consultants? Likely not.
Councillor Burke, Councillor Maven.
I'm interested in knowing, will Herb Street be absolutely out to 4 lanes when this is ready to be occupied?
We'll ask 3.
Anybody?
No.
Bueller?
That would be more the regional question, but we're involved in it. Cam, do you want to take a shot?
Certainly, through Mayor Jaworski to Councillor Burke. Can we guarantee that? Absolutely not, to be quite upfront. But if you see the work that's already occurring about moving the hydro, it is going to be done imminently, the region. They're not pausing on this. It's moving as quickly as it can based on the resources and weather. And as noted, if by the removal of the H, certain things can occur, including the interior circulation. That to fix the situation that's occurring there right now internally, we need to get the underground services put in place, and then we can start working on the redesign through site plan to get that all in place. It could be a few months before. Again, it depends on market conditions, on how they can lease it. Are they phasing it 1 building, 2 buildings, 3 buildings? I'm not certain, but I can't guarantee that that would happen, Councillor Burke.
But what I heard is they're in to your belief, they're in the ballpark of plus or minus a few months of each other.
That's correct.
Thank you. Councilor Maven, sorry, back to you.
And thank you, Mayor Jaworski, again to you. And I'm trying to come to grips with the fact, okay, what happens if we don't hold the holding provision? But that's my last question. My first question is going to be, so we're going to construct Herb Street, which was originally scheduled for 2018, which was moved to 2019, which is now 2020. And all in all, it might happen in 2020. I agree with your comment on that. But if it happens in 2020, when the development comes to sort of fruition, does that mean that we're actually going to have fewer lanes going out there when they open up the stores?
Through Mayor Jaworski to Councillor Maven, no, there will be a full 4 lanes. We'll have interior improvements, which even as the delegate did speak about having dedicated right turn lanes, perhaps different things to help. And I don't see this site all of a sudden getting 100% of their customers day one.
No, you guess that wasn't quite clear.
Sorry.
So you've got a 2-lane road right now, and you've got, I don't go there Saturdays. One is I don't drive much. Secondly is my wife won't go there. And when it comes down to it, you're going to take 2 lanes that exist right now, and you're going to make it 1 lane during the construction of the widening. That's usually what happens, right?
Again, through Mayor Jaworski, quite often, and this is what we did with Columbia Street, is you try and maintain the similar amount of flow that existed through construction. So you shift everything over to, in this case, it would be perhaps to the south, and you maintain the existing flow of 1 lane each direction. You complete the north part of the street, and then you flip it. That's probably what
it's hard to do with a 2-lane road.
I'm sorry?
Compared to a 4-lane road.
That's what I would predict they would do in this case, out on Herb. They would start on the south or the north, keep one of them open, and then flip-flop back and forth, basically, as they construct.
And I'm not an expert, and you are, and I just totally acknowledge that. But what I'm seeing, what I'm envisioning happening, is they're going to take 2 lanes, make it into 1 lane, and we're going to be living with the Herb Street and 1-lane traffic. How are they going to do it? Maybe it's going to be real slow. Maybe it's going to be drive on the shoulder. There's culverts on both sides. There's environmentally sensitive areas on both sides. So they don't have a whole lot of flexibility that way. But I don't know how they're going to do it. Versus if Platinum Drive is built and that connection to Columbia Street is first, then at least that would make more sense. Is that not logical?
Again, through Mayor Jaworski to Councillor Maven, that would depend on where the actual traffic was originating or where they plan to go as to whether that would make it eat better or not. If you were in the new West Side subdivisions or out where perhaps where Mr. Thomason lives and is coming in, maybe that would make it easier. But for the most part, I don't think the opening of Platinum would help most of the customers of the Costco store, in my observation or my belief.
Yeah, and I'm just remembering how King Street was like during construction, and I'm seeing somewhat of a parallel on Herb Street West if we release the holding provision. That's where I'm coming from, Ken.
I would predict that the traffic situation right now, because of the hydro work, is probably about as bad as you're going to get it when they're constructing the full 4 lanes. I would think it would be very similar, but for, again, it's a brief period of time to get the 4-lane road ultimately built.
Okay, I'll just change tacks just for a second then. And going back to Councilor Durrell's question about time, when I looked at traffic studies and we met with regional staff, and Cam, you were part of that, but I thought it was 6 or 7 minutes. 6.9 is what it seems to be is one of the delay times at peak periods.
Correct. Through Mayor Jaworski, Councillor Maven, the original study, as proposed by a local consulting firm, which I'm not going to say, did suggest a 6 to 7 minute delay on the original application when it first came in, probably the spring of 2014 or so. And when that study actually went through a peer review and looked at the regional methodology of how they conduct studies in the city, then it was, I'll say, flawed. And that's when a newer study came in using regional methodology and our own methodology, and it came in at around the minute and a half in around that. And I think today that's typically what you will see. It's an unusual circumstance at the moment because of the constriction with the trying to get the hydro starting to move that aside. That's an unusual circumstance. But before that was occurring, I think probably most times it was minute and a half delay. So it was pretty accurate, I believe.
Okay, then the question is, what if we don't release the holding provision and we proceed, get the roadworks in place first?
And this relates a little bit to the one delegation is referring to that there's no sign-in sheet. This is not a typical zoning bylaw. This is the removal of a holding provision, which is purely technical, and where only the applicant has an ability to appeal if council chooses not to lift the holding provision. A general member of the public cannot appeal council's decision in this regard. Only the developer, the person asking to remove the holding, can appeal if council chooses not to, because it's a technical exercise. The land use has been decided through that public process. Now it's just satisfying technical questions, if you will, that the council placed on it.
Thank you.
Question, Councillor
Yes, it
Maven?
does. Thank you.
Councillor Veith.
To follow up on Father
Maven.
Dr. Mr. Councillor Maven. Reverend
Sister
Maven.
Angela, it's okay.
No, I forget my question. What do you mean by Mr. Rapp, what do you mean by appeal? What does that look like?
Through Mayor Jaworski to Councillor Veith. What do I mean by appeal in this case? A typical zoning bylaw amendment or official plan amendment, many of our planning processes allow anybody to appeal a decision of any type of council, to say yes to approval or say no. And people have the right to appeal. That's typical for a land use decision. The land use decision was done 4 years ago. It said this type of commercial use is allowed, subject to some technical exercises occurring, and those technical exercises are the ones we've been talking about. So the general public, the way the Act works, was involved early on, and now it's a technical exercise. So with that, if council chooses not to lift the holding because the technical exercises have been completed, in staff's opinion, then, excuse me, the proponent has the ability to take that decision to the LPAT, which is the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal, which is the replacement of the Intermunicipal Board, to say that refusal to lift the H was not a good planning decision based on the technical conditions laid out in that holding provision.
Okay. Don't see any further questions, but we'd be looking for a motion one way or the other. I can't make one. Councillor Durrell moved it. Seconded by Councillor Whaley. Oh, please comment.
So, how are we going to get to the future here? How are we going to clean up traffic here? We're going to let this holding provision go so that they can do the underground infrastructure on the plaza, so that they can fix the parking issue in the plaza, so that they can get on with widening Herb Street. It all has to flow out in a coordinated effort, beginning with approving this holding pattern.
Further commentary, Councillor Burke, Councillor Maven.
And I have serious concerns that things will be ready in time. And we've already seen it out there. If you go out at Christmas, you'll see it. That being said, we need to move along at some point and get the work done with, you know, a soon-to-be Tim Hortons on one corner, and Lord knows what else is going to show up out there. I, by the way, Councillor Maven, also avoid Costco with my wife on Saturdays, so I fully support you there. I'll go ahead and support this, but I really am I wish we had a little bit more cart and a little less horse. We were a little bit further down the road and had things finished, but in order to get things moving, sometimes we need to do this kind of stuff.
Councilor Maven's next.
And thank you, Mayor Jaworski, and through you. What I'm looking for is just priorities. If you get the road infrastructure, you get a few connecting links in place, and then release the holding. You're going to release the holding provision anyway. And the timing is, and I think, Cam, you said it the best, if it proceeds in 2020, because it's already been delayed a couple of times. Yes, they've done some preliminary work. They've moved some things around. Bottom line is, a project that was supposed to be done 2 or 3 years ago, if it had been done then, would have eased this problem, made this releasing this holding provision easier. It didn't happen. And now we're saying, oh yeah, it'll happen though in 2020. But this holding provision will be released today when council approves it. And I think that let's just deal with some certainties, because these are big. If it's 70 seconds now or 90 seconds at Iron Needles and Herb Street, I don't think so. Not at peak times. Not from what my observations are. And the feedback I get from the neighborhood residents, but basically my own observations, it's more than 90 seconds in a minute and a half or 2 minutes. Bottom line is, if we just wait, make some road infrastructure improvements, whether it's region or us, and get those in place first, this will be a smoother operation for everybody. Not just for the city, and not for the residents in surrounding. It'll be smoother for Costco too. Is there any way that we can just allow them to do certain things without removing the holding provisions? Can we do conditional holding provision or some such thing?
Through Mayor Jaworski to Councillor Maven, my understanding is it's only through holding, and which has already occurred, where you can do, I'll call it conditional zoning. And that's a stretch, because there's really no such thing as conditional zoning. So that was the mechanism, but to implement, do something else, I'm not aware of anything, Councillor Maven.
Okay, so the only improvements that have been made in that area for traffic is we made Iron Needles north-south, 2 lanes up to Herb Street and a little bit beyond, and we put right turn lanes into going east and west. We haven't made anything at all going east and west in reality. There's no 4 lanes on Herb Street. There's no 4 lanes beyond. There's no right turn lanes that really can work from Herb to Iron Needles and from Herb east to Iron Needles. So I'm still seeing some lacking infrastructure, and it doesn't justify at this point in time releasing the holding provision. I realize it won't make everybody happy, but I won't be supporting it. And not that that's going to make a big difference, I don't think, but bottom line is it's just the wrong thing to do. Thank you.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, I will be supporting this motion. The traffic study that was done used traffic projections that far and away exceed their capacity right now. So the design that's happening is and it is advancing. It's under construction right now. The hydro tower is almost moved. Like that's a huge piece. And a lot has changed out there. The region did widen Iron Needles to 4 lanes since this operation went into B. And I'm one of those sorry sods that does end up going to Costco on Saturdays in rush hour, and because I can't get there during working hours. And I wait, and I actually don't find that it's impeding my lifestyle too dramatically. And I wait to use the landfill site as well.
Waste management.
The sanitary waste management landfill site. You know what? The perfect solution for this property, that ship sailed by the OMB. In my mind's eye, this is what we got. there's many times that I do go there where even when the lineup for the gas bar is 20 deep, it takes me less than 20 seconds or 30 seconds to advance through a lineup. It goes very, very quickly because of the way that they operate those pumps. I appreciate that people don't like this. And when this first came to council, I was very concerned. The city hired a third-party peer reviewer to go through that traffic study. We didn't just take the developer's word for it. We hired Julia Salvini as outside peer review for us as a city. I think she's an exceptional traffic engineer, and she pushed the envelope on lots of things. And I believe our staff are giving us advice that is in alignment with the OMB outcome. We lost the day then. And so it's time to just let's get this right. And our site plan process isn't all of that easy to get through. So I think personally the developers being pretty, shall we say, optimistic about how quickly they can get through our site plan process.
Councillor Henry up next.
Thank you, Mayor. And I had the pleasure of chairing that meeting on the Costco planning decision and original matter. I still have memories of that sometimes when I wake up in a cold sweat in the middle of the night. And I had spent, even though the solution was presented from around the table, I had spent the days before that meeting with staff making sure we had a reasonable exit from a challenging decision that came to council. Knowing that all of the traffic studies were against public opinion and that we did not have a leg to stand on for opposing the zone change application. So in many ways, the settlement that we achieved through the board was a significant victory for this council and for the people that were concerned to make sure that we had a number of improvements for Costco. And the focus was always on Costco, not the 3 Best Buy size stuff. There was not any real contention around the proposed holding provisions for phase 2, which is what carried forward here. It was always about Costco. We got a lot more than I thought we would get when we started out that process in terms of making sure improvements advanced before it opened. That was the fight. Wasn't a fight over phase 2. Phase 2, people pretty much agreed that these holding provisions, as presented today and as met today, were reasonable. And so here we are. We have a legally binding settlement and an agreement. Not as we wish it might be, as the delegate seems to prefer to think that the holding provision was around these things being constructed. It was not. It is not. It is what it is, and this is what's before us, and it'll build out. And I've been to Costco several times, not generally on Saturday, so I'll take Councillor Freeman's word for it. Things move. It feels when you're sitting at a roundabout or waiting, it always feels longer than when you're sitting at an intersection for the same period of time, because you have to keep your brain on when you're at a roundabout in a way that you don't tend to when you're driving in an intersection. It feels longer. But the data's there. It's being peer reviewed up the wazoo, far better than I can do as a layperson around this table. And so the holding provision removal as a technical exercise has been well satisfied technically, and we do need to approve it today.
Thank you. Seeing no further comments, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? That's 2. Thank you. But I would say that the delegate did bring points that I think we all kind of agree on, is the T intersection within the traffic, within the parking lot itself actually is part of the problem, but for experts to consider. Moving along, we are going to skip all the way down to new business. But first up, I have Councillor Maven with new business.
Yeah.
And we'll look for a waiver of notice of motion on this. That's the scouting one.
Please. So Mayor Jaworski came to me and said, "Bob, you must have been a Boy Scout." Yes, First Bridgeport. And anyhow, Apple Day is this weekend, and we have to approve Apple Day, or grant permission at least for the Scouts to have Apple Day.
So would somebody like to waive notice of motion for Apple Day? Councillor Whaley, Councillor Freeman, sorry. Sorry, Councillor.
Thank you very much. So the motion I'd like to make is that council grant permission to the local Waterloo Scout groups to be on City Waterloo property to hold an Apple Day for the programming for Waterloo Scout Group on Friday, October 12th and Saturday, October 13th, 2018. Thank you.
With Councillor Henry being so anxious to waive notice, I'll let you do the seconder on this one. Any discussion? All those in favor? That's all of us. Thank you. Thanks for Apple Day. Councillor Durrell has similar item.
I'd like to...
Less tasty.
Yes, I'd like to make a request to waive notice of motion
on a topic relating to
77 King Street, North Waterloo.
Okay.
And thank you.
Councillor Whaley, Councillor Veith, all those in favor? Okay.
Okay, so the motion is there's a business that is going to is applying for a liquor license for a patio on the rooftop, and it happens to be in the Albert McGregor Conservation District, just on the outskirts of it. And so we have set a precedent in the past that we have sent a letter into the AGCQO, thank you, gentlemen. And we would like to do that again. So the motion is that the Council of the Corporation of the City of Waterloo object to the current proposal from 77 King Street, North Waterloo, for the operation of a licensed outdoor patio in the McGregor Albert Heritage Conservation District, known as MACA, as the potential development will dramatically impact the city's only heritage district and the quality of life of its surrounding residents. As I said, this is in response to a second floor outside patio. What we're saying in this is the current proposal, and so I know that there's many citizens that are also writing letters, so I would appreciate if council would be amenable to. I will write a letter on behalf of council, and we'll also have this motion that will go along to the hearing that's happening in 2 weeks, which is why we have to waive motion, because we're not back here till November, and then we're done. I'll move that motion.
Seconded by Councillor Whaley. Discussion on this topic. We've all seen emails from numerous residents who are not looking forward to the music in the backyard. All those in favor? All of us, thank you.
Thank you.
Back to Councillor Durrell. I think you have some commentary under new business.
Yes, I do. So I wanted to thank Councillor Henry. Well, much of our council came out to our first ever Lumen Festival. Our staff said that we had close to 10,000 people come out to that event, probably more than that. We lit up uptown. We opened up the streetscape bike lanes officially. But more importantly, there were thousands and thousands and thousands of people uptown. So it was beautiful. My joke on Saturday night was Uptown got her groove back. Mm-hmm. So thanks for everybody who came out. I wanted to point out how hard our arts and culture staff worked to make this happen. They worked collaboratively with a lot of our local organizations like the Button Factory and the Clay and Glass, and had some great local businesses that came forward to help sponsor the event as well. So there was 5 different areas. For those of you who saw Kid Koala DJ, it was so great. And I mean, we lit up Shopify. I mean, there was fire that moved to music. It was a delight. I remember when our Arts and Culture Committee brought forward their report, and they said they wanted whimsy was the word that they used. And it was whimsical. I felt like it was whimsical that night. So it was awesome. And then, unless anybody else wants to comment on Lumen, it was awesome. Okay. And then we officially opened our first Waterloo urban park expansion ever, which was Mary Ellen Park. So I totally want to thank this council for getting behind that park. And we turned a parking lot into additional green space. The the whole community was out. It was a barbecue. There was bands playing. It was an amazing event, and it just shows you how parks are about community and about neighborhood building, and it was beautiful. So thanks, Mayor Jaworski, for coming out.
And didn't a certain mayor turn on some special lights at 8 p.m. on Saturday night?
Goodness gracious.
Lots of good stuff going on.
Right. We should talk about, so we have new lighting features in Uptown Waterloo, which are incredible, designed locally by a designer, I guess, from IBI, Mark Holland, which I love because we had them designed here. They were made locally. We kicked the crap out of them at the city center to make sure that they could withstand children and students
And like children, yeah.
and Maven and cars jumping into them. So anyway, we know that they're very strong and sturdy, just like the people of Uptown Waterloo. I'll just add that. It's a ridiculous amount of colors. And so now we'll be taking requests to turn Uptown whatever color you need it to be.
Thank you, Councillor. One question I keep getting, and this I guess to staff, one quick question I keep getting. Lumen, was it a one-time deal, a pilot, or is it an ongoing festival? Tim.
Mayor Jaworski, it was our inaugural event, and
good.
I think the intentions are to repeat it going forward. Ideally, we'll grow it with sponsorship and more attendees in the future.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Further items? Who wants to enact some bylaws? Councillor Henry, Councillor Freeman do. All those in favor? Who wants to go? Councillor Maven, Councillor Burke do. All those in favor? That's all of us. Thank you.